Continuing with the process with the scheduling informal workshop session meetings between the board and its 5 advisory groups, we've invited the Open Space Advisory Committee this evening, and we're honored to have the chairman here, Mr. Nybarger, who I believe has a short PowerPoint presentation. In the screen work.
Hello, my name is John Nybarger. I live at 1514 East Waldona Way, and I'm the chairman of the Open Space Advisory Committee. And basically what I wanted to do is just give I wasn't quite sure what this 15 minutes, or we as a committee weren't quite sure what the 15 minutes was, so hopefully I can get this done in maybe about 10, 12 minutes and leave a little time for questions and discussion if need be. Like I said, I'm the chairman. Our Deb Williams, board member, is also on the committee, and she's our board liaison as well. So I'd like to also apologize for not getting this to you beforehand. I finished it this afternoon, so be good reason why. But this is on the hard drive here, and you can be able to have access to this. So I'm not going to read all of this in detail, but I think it's good for especially the newer board members as well as some of the older ones to sort of a little bit on the history. We started back in April of 2001 when the board passed a resolution creating OSAC, basically just sort of look at what's the open space in town and could we maybe buy some and how much might it cost and where would we get the funds from and how would we decide which parcels we would like to try and protect. And then over the next roughly 3 years, 4 years actually, we went about a process to determine all of those items. And so big steps in that was in November of 2001, a 0.3% sales tax was passed. And along with that, in November in 2004, a bonding authority up to $12 million was granted by the voters to be using the open space tax fund to pay off those bonds. We took, I think it was $6.8 million worth of bonding monies that we have now. So we still have money left to be able to bond against at some future time. And in 2006, we started an acquisition phase, in which case, from 2006 to 2009, we've protected just over 213 acres of open space. So one of the big steps that we worked on was trying to identify what are these open space parcels, what are the open parcels in town, what would be good, what would be parcels that would have a high value of open space. We did a very lengthy process, which was in our 2005 summary report, and we identified 8 properties that had a high value of open space. This is both as a buffer, a buffer for from development, an area for natural habitat to occur, also for views. We've got beautiful views off to the west, and so you can see a lot of these properties along our western border here. So these are the 8 properties that we originally identified, and this is the current status on those 8. So you can see that these original 8 we've purchased the southern 13 acres on Auctioner, Arsinoe, Lostoka, and Verhey. Smith has now been developed. That's the Comonte development. Boljack, Level 3, and Zaharias are now the only sort of open properties that from our original report. And of course, I also include Madsen on here, even though it wasn't in our original report as a high-value open space. It was purchased in December of last year. Just give you an idea on some of the dollars that we're talking about and the success that we've had in partnering with other municipalities. Just going down here to the total acres, or the total's 213 acres at almost $13 million, of which just more than half really is coming from outside entities. So we've been very, very successful and very happy to be working obviously with Boulder County for and the city of Boulder for the purchase of Verhey, which is this very large parcel here. Another aspect that although looking through our original charge, it didn't really mention trails that much, but we've sort of taken it upon ourselves to think that trails are really important because we need to be able to access them. So working both with OSAC as well as the parks Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails Advisory Committee, coming up with a coherent trails plan for the open space in town. And so this is just wanted to give you a little summary of our 5-year trail plan. This particular slide here, this image came from for the management plan, a comprehensive management plan that Boulder County had put together to come up with how they're going to manage this very large section of land that's to our west. And one thing that they identified, and they're obviously putting in now, is this very key trail going from the Single Tree Trailhead to the south to the Colton Trail, and then also another link at some time in the future, which will probably actually be later this year, hopefully, to go from the end of the Single Tree Trail out to the west to the Marshall Mesa site. So in our 5-year trail plan, one thing that we and the staff and the board obviously have tried to do is to take some open space tax funds, use some of those for trail improvements. And so in 2010, this year, we're going to be working on the Colton Trailhead, around $100,000 worth, and also a regional, a potential neighborhood connection, as the county called it, going from the Rock Creek Parkway to the new Colton, the Colton Trail, the Superior Colton Trail. We're still trying to come up with a clever name for that, by the way. So the other aspect is this number 3 here in 2011. And this is a pedestrian bridge that would help complete a more trail-oriented aspect of the regional Coal Creek Trail. Right now, when you're on the regional Coal Creek Trail, you have to go on surface streets, and it would be nice to be able to hook up to that trail in a more trail-oriented rather than street-oriented manner. Another neighborhood connection again to this new trail that's going to be going in from original town to the Colton Trailhead is going to go right close to the Ridge Apartments as well, or proposed at least. And something new that we've been talking about a little bit, and that is to go south from the Colton Trailhead. And I've got another whole slide on this, but to go south from the Colton Trailhead, to go through Verhey to eventually connect up with Rocky Flats. And so this is really just sort of a placeholder and an idea. We'd love to get the board's opinion on this, and also get the board and staff buy-in to work with other municipalities. Verhey, obviously, we need an easement from the city of Boulder, and then also the county owns the fee simple on it. And I realized that the 5-year trail plan didn't include 5 full years, so we have some other thinking to do, and that'd be another opportunity we'd like to talk with you on. And so this is sort of getting a real big picture of the trail system. So here's Superior over here, and sometime later this year or early next year, an entire trail system that goes all the way around. So this is the Marshall Loop here, the Greenbelt, the High Plains Trail, the Colton Trail to here, and then to get into original town on the new connector, and then back around to the Marshall Mesa. This entire area, I measured it at one point, and I can't remember. I think it's almost 19 miles. I mean, it's an amazing trail, and this trailhead, obviously being an important regional connection for that, is going to be in place, and something that we're thinking about that we'd again like to be able to work forward on is being able to make a connection that would go along the eastern edge of the Verhey parcel, and to be able to hook up to Rocky Flats. And this is from the Rocky Flats website, and you can see they've got some rough ideas of where some trails would go. And we're looking at this area right here on the right, where our internal trail system, and of course working with the county, would be able to connect in with that. So being able to go from, going from Chautauqua to the Mesa Trailhead, or pardon me, the Eldorado Springs Trailhead, to be able to get to Marshall Mesa, to get into Superior, then to being able to get all the way out to here. I mean, it's a huge, amazing network. So those are just some of the trail ideas that we have. In conclusion, I'd like to, well, I and our committee would love to have an opportunity to have more of a roundtable style discussion. We've had those in years past, and just everybody could sit down and maybe for an hour or two. I mean, there's a fairly large budget, and there's a lot of money in bond money right now, and figure out how is this going to be best used, and get some public input as well, of course. And so we'd like to encourage that, be able to do that at some point. Another thing that we've been talking about, it's come up over the last couple of years, and we've finally decided to vote on it and make it a recommendation, but have some educational opportunities for the committee to be able to attend a conference. For instance, there's COSA, the Colorado Open Space Association, has a conference every year, and so it would be nice to be able to maybe send a committee member or two, and we were also thinking be able to also fund a staff member and using the open space funds for that. And we'd really like to, as we always try to remind and try to be, move this forward in the best way that's possible, is to take advantage of the money that we have and the partnerships that we've built, and to try and to make some of these large scale acquisitions. I think the program has been wildly successful, as you could see from what we've been able to protect. But there's still money there, and there's still properties that we can protect. And so that would be level 3 being sort of our highest priority there, and then also the Bulljack and Zaharias parcel. And so with that, I believe we've got some nice pictures here of level 3 and Zaharias and Arsinoe, and then just sort of for historical purposes, I put Listoka because that was our first purchase. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. That was really great, and a really great background. And one point you just went past, we said it took a while to do that first assessment of the properties, but you didn't explain that was because you all camped out on the properties, measured the birds and animals going through and all that. It wasn't just something that took a while because you're all dragging your feet, but I think you deserve a lot of credit for all that work that you and the committee members put in at that point. That was pretty amazing. And then I really, I haven't seen that, the board here, I think, hasn't seen that clear sort of phased approach and how what you have in mind sort of fits into a near-term and longer-term plan, and how you're leveraging with the trails from other communities as well. And I think that's just a great, the maps were really, really helpful for me for that. And I think your plan sounds beyond sensible, and gosh, what a lot of miles we could have with just a couple of connections. I mean, the 19 is amazing to start with, but then connecting onto Rocky Flats and so on, the miles just start exploding. It's terrific. So thanks, great job.
Thank you. One thing I did want to mention real briefly too is I was recently appointed to the county Parks and Open Space Advisory Committee as well. So I'm looking forward to some closer work with the county for both our local areas on behalf of OSAC, but then of course around the county as well. So
we'll all benefit from that.
another nice
yes.
Contact. So.
Very much.
Thanks, Elia.
Just a quick comment. I just want to say, John, your presentations are always eagerly anticipated, but this is probably the best because in very few minutes you capture the past, the history, where we are right now, and your vision for the future. So, interesting idea about having some money for further education. I don't think that you've ever asked for that before, have you? That's the first
No,
time.
no,
I think
it's
that's
just
definitely
talk
worth.
about it, but never have.
It's definitely worth considering. So, thank you again.
Anybody else, Chris?
I like the idea of the 1 to 2 hour roundtable, and I would also suggest that what's the possibilities of having him come in once a quarter and do a 5, 10, 15-minute presentation update on what they're doing, but also maybe have the chairs of the committees involved in the executive sessions when we discuss issues that are specific to what they're reviewing.
Let's see, so the answer to that one is not completely clear-cut, that executive sessions, if we invite the public, which would be non-elected members, that basically would mean that everybody would have access to it. So then there's no reason to have an executive session.
So even if we just have the chairman of that committee come in, we can't invite just them? Because I thought we had learned differently over the weekend that you could invite a committee chair in. You could invite anybody you want in.
But unless you have some new communication with a lawyer that I'm not aware of.
Okay.
So,
John, this question may overlap into ProStack, as many of these things do, and I see on we were given a copy of your work plan, which, and in the third quarter, you're inviting Louisville Open Space Committee to meet in Superior, and I think in talking about linkages, what seems very important on the horizon is linkage to the potential open space in ConocoPhillips, as well as trails and open space. That's where I say, not sure if it's ProStack or us, but it would be a shame if the Rock Creek Trail didn't link to Rock Creek through ConocoPhillips, for example.
Right, yeah, thank you for being so, seeing something that I left out, and that was these little red dots way up here. And we're thinking about that. That's not in our 5-year trail plan right now because we're still not quite sure how that's going to work. But one idea is to go have a trail that moves somewhere along the Zaharias parcel, which is this one, to be able to connect in after the bridge into the ConocoPhillips trail system. Part of the ConocoPhillips development, working with Broomfield, and also the county is a trail connection underneath 36.
Yeah,
that's going to connect.
That's a natural.
That's going to connect the Coal Creek and the Rock Creek trail systems to be able to be continuous and go all the way through. And another idea is to go from the western end of the ConocoPhillips site, go across 88 and go through that open space there, which I can't remember the name of it right now. Scriffany? I think it might be called Scriffany. I can't remember. I've got it in my notes somewhere. But be able to go through there, and there's an underpass that's right next to the cemetery that is existing, and be able to connect in with our proposed town center development.
I was going to mention that as a possible linkage too. But you're on top of that, and the key is working with Louisville.
And Louisville's been very, very open. They invited us with the first meeting that they had with ConocoPhillips, and we're looking forward to being able to get together with them in the future. Obviously, Louisville's the lead on that. It's in their municipality, but they're being very very receptive, and we're looking forward to getting together with them again later in the year and see how the open space aspects are developing in the trails and the Parks and Rec, of course.
Let's see, I had a couple of. So what education things do you think that would be for 2010? Do you need to have something adjusted for 2010, or otherwise are you talking about putting it into the budget for 2011?
Well, so the COSI conference this year is actually in Westminster, so it would be I think it's Westminster. I see Trustee Skumat's looking funny. Yes, no, it's I believe it. I believe it's in Westminster.
Signs. So I didn't get that. That was the education you meant. So this is clear.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No. So that would be to attend conferences.
Thank you.
Apologize. So that's in Westminster this year, and it moves all over the state. I think last time it was in Aspen. We have it down in Durango and in different places, all around the state. And so that would be the idea. It's in September 14th through 17th, I think it is.
And is there a registration, or is it for travel expenses, or?
I don't think that there won't be any. I don't think there'd be any room and board or travel expenses because again, it's so close in this particular case. So we could, if we wanted to send a lot more people with those monies. But I think the idea was just to sort of get that on the radar. Sort of get that interest and build up that education, those connections as well with other municipalities, because there's a lot of things that we've done that we'd really like to share that we've been successful with, and we can always learn more from others and bring that back here.
I'd suggest I don't think the board would have any difficulty with this at all. So I mean, it'd be great to have, if you can give us as much information as you feel like you have, that we could then act upon it, because I can't imagine anybody's going to have any difficulty with that level of expenditure. So, And then, are you on POSAC? Is that the county
Yeah,
one?
that's the county board, too.
So they've been talking, obviously, about in Boulder as well, about non-municipal acquisition of open space, specifically around Rocky Flats. And is that,
Is this the Section 16
yes,
discussion? Okay.
yeah. Is that on OSAC's radar, or have you talked about that at all, or?
I think Juanita would know that the current status in more depth. From what I remembered, it sort of fallen off the radar because it was going to be a really complicated swap between the state conservation board and the Salazar had to be involved. I mean, it was really it was a multi-entity swap in order to get it to work, and it I think there were some things falling through the cracks, so it wasn't able to go forward. But as you remember, the town of Superior and I think the city of Boulder said that they put up $1 million to be able to help facilitate that. So I think that's sort of just sitting off on the side, but Juanita.
So that's, OSAC is open to that possibility.
We're open to that, and to be honest, I actually haven't seen that on the look ahead for POSAC, but I could ask Ron Stewart and see what's
It might
going
be,
on.
it's probably with City of Boulder, if I reflect upon this, because I don't think the county can purchase outside county boundaries, so they'd have to go through some other mechanism, probably. But I know that there's a big discussion right now about purchasing additional open space on Section 16. So, I think that would be helpful to have a collaborative approach. I mean, it's not in the town of Superior, but then again, it's an important regional open space acquisition. So. And then Zaharias, I think that if I remember, and my memory is fading me as I get older, but I think there was a discussion about just partial acquisition around the water for migratory birds or whatever. And is it the whole parcel is felt to be important for open space, or is it the level, the area around the pond or the reservoir, I guess?
Well, so when we made our original summary report recommendations in 2005, it was for the entire parcel. Recently, we made a recommendation to Boulder County, and after talking with Boulder County, they weren't interested in the entire parcel, but were interested in, or would be receptive, I should say, not necessarily interested, but receptive to a recommendation from us to see the land that's closer to the pond protected. And the idea then would be one idea would be to put a sort of a boardwalk type walkway partway along the pond there for bird viewing, for instance.
And if the rest of the parcel was, it's a difficult area just in terms of transportation issues, but in terms of quality open space, it's right next to the freeway. So I always, I wonder about whether or not it's just a partial purchase, or
Say that fast.
yeah, exactly, or if it's through the development process. I don't know if you have a feeling about that.
Yeah, I know along the northern edge there's sort of a drainage area, and there's a lot of reeds in there, and I think there's a lot of wildlife that go through there. Obviously, the pond itself has a lot of wildlife. There's a American white pelican flock now that has set up summer residency, and they hadn't been there in the past. So I think maybe the last 3 or 4 years they've been.
I see them flying over periodically.
Yeah, so they've set up all summer, so they're migratory, and they've decided to hang out here for the summer. So
Yeah.
it's very
And then in terms of the trail alignment, that was noted as a neighborhood connection. That is, I'm trying to decipher this, but I think it's basically at the end of Sycamore.
this one.
Yeah. And is there so I have some thoughts about, I've seen the trail go all the way behind Sagamore in the past, and it doesn't seem like there's any parking there at Sycamore. Is it something that would be continued behind the entirety of Sagamore with a connection, or?
Well, These potential neighborhood connections came about basically because I went to POSAC and lobbied them, and then lobbied the commissioners to allow local neighborhood connections. And so these were just 3 that sort of brainstormed as
Yeah.
possible locations as sort of a placeholder, whether or not they go or not, but just having the county, part of its management plan, allow something to go there. And we haven't really talked a lot about that particular local neighborhood link.
Because looking at the map, I just wondered whether or not the yellow dotted that's coming along, that's parallel to Marshall right now. Yeah, and if you just extend that to the east a little bit. East.
To the west? Oh,
East. So from there, going east,
Right. Oh,
then you would
like
just
that.
automatically align with the red dot, so you actually don't even have
Yeah.
it's built in basically to have a potential neighborhood connection without having to build a new one.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there's some drainage crossing that's, is a difficult problem there, or I just don't know.
This is the FRICO ditch.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure you're aware of the issues with the FRICO ditch company that the county has had. And so they've been able to secure the crossings down here, but they haven't requested a crossing up there, so I think that would be very difficult.
Just from my mind, it seems like it would be a nice connection right there. If you could, depending on where you're crossing FRICO, if instead of crossing it at that area, is to actually push it out east. Yes, right. Who's ever doing that? That's a very nice job with the. Is that you, underhanded? Very. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, basically right where your line is, because then you have the neighborhood connection without having to build it. So at least from my perspective, it would be a nice community asset for the people that are living over there.
Yeah, it would be nice. Although it's not too far to go down the road to get on, but
No.
that's true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the complication with that would be the FRICO crossing.
Yeah.
Not to be underestimated.
No, definitely not. It's taken an extra year, almost. Yeah, basically an extra year.
Wow.
So this trail would have been done,
Right.
a year ago almost. So.
Great. That's all the questions I had. Anything else from the board?
I just wanted to say one thing. I know I'm a little biased here, but being on the committee, but I just wanted to thank all the committee members and all your efforts over the long, long years. It's been a very good group of citizens working on the open space report and open space in general. So I want to thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Nice
Great.
job, John.
Thank you very much, as always. All right. That brings us to Tier 3 streets.
Again, at the board's strategic planning session back in late January, the board had asked for an update on the town's experiment this past winter season with a more extensive plowing of residential streets. As a precedent to all of that, the reason that we were in a position to do so many residential streets, what we refer to as Tier 3 streets this year, was because of a favorable contract extension with our third-party service provider. They were previously known as ACC. They're now called TerraCare. As a result of last year's negotiations, we got, without any cost increase, we got them to increase the equipment hours from 600 to 1,150 contract hours. With that additional allocation of equipment, Kurt was able to manage the hours efficiently so that we had a significant presence on most of our residential streets. You received the quantitative report, but Kurt's here to both make a short presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, as well as answer any questions the board may have, and then I'll wrap it up with some suggestions or next steps. Kurt?
Thanks, Scott. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Board. Kurt Carr, Public Works Director. At any point in time, feel free to jump in with suggestions, problems, successes you saw throughout the year. But we're here to review basically the entire 2010 snow season. I know it as I saw it this season. I don't have historical benchmarks like many of you. You've seen other winners here, so I'm open to all kinds of comments on how you felt things went. As Scott touched on briefly, we have several routes, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. If you're not familiar with those different routes are, the red routes on the map are the Tier 1s, basically our primary arterial roads. The blues are Tier 2. Those are our secondary streets. You can call them secondary arterials, primary collectors. And then Tier 3, which are kind of secondary collectors, neighborhood residential streets. That's kind of the framework we work within right now and how we break out where we plow and when. So the timeline that we're kind of following up on right now, we had budget discussions back in September and October of last year. And around that time, I had just started, and town manager asked me to take a look at what we had. And, let's discuss how we can attack this Tier 3 goal. And what we decided was we would budget the funds, we would try some things through the winter season, and then we would all get together again in the spring and talk about how it went. So this is kind of closing that loop from that original budget discussion. We got our first test in the first storm of the year. I think we got about 2 feet of snow, but we went ahead and had TerraCare, ACC at that time, plow the Tier 3 and see how that went. From all indications at that point in time, it really didn't look like we had a cost increase with the hours we were out there. We were able to have those Tier 3 streets. And we kind of discussed that here in one of the board meetings. And so we continued that through the winter. And so we did do Tier 1 through Tier 3 all winter long. And so now we're here today to talk about, what those numbers look like. In review, that 2010 budget number was $190,000. That was to get a Class 7 single axle dump truck with salt sand spreader and a plow, and a 4-wheel drive 1-ton dump truck. So 2 new vehicles, or 1 new vehicle, 1 replacement vehicle, and we were going to do Tier 3 with those vehicles. Again, we're going to monitor the season, we're going to view it in the spring, and we're going to determine our needs for vehicles. I think the biggest change we made is we just kind of made a simple change in philosophy. We thought we had contractors, they work for us. Let's use them wisely, let's use them efficiently. Basically, let's expect more out of them for the existing contracts we have in place. The staff did a review, we looked at the routes, we looked at the equipment they had out there, and just kind of, it looked like maybe there was some surplus capability. That's why we made that decision to push them. Again, we talked about the pilot storm and review of that pilot storm and no cost increase to the town. So again, we cleared all Tier 1 through Tier 3. I thought TerraCare did a good job. I think they met the minimum requirements of their contract, if not more than the requirements of their contract. We've heard different comments about TerraCare, but I think what's important is to balance what the requirements are of the contract versus what expectations might be of the community and make sure those match. So I think in any case where a comment might be made against TerraCare, it's probably a difference in expectation versus performance related to a contract. We did supplement TerraCare twice with town staff and our own pickup trucks to go into all the residentials. We did that on the October 26th storm, and then we did that on, I don't have the second day, but about a month ago. We had a big storm that came in at night. We did in the middle of the night, we plowed the entire town. Again, minimal cost increase for the year. I'll go through the numbers just for everyone here that you've already received. The chart here is just to illustrate, we had a trend line. It's the red line on this graph. It's basically our equipment hours versus the date and where we're at. So the red line is kind of where we should be if we just spend a uniform amount of hours throughout the season. The green line is actually where we trended throughout the season as we used hours with TerraCare. And essentially, to come in at our 1,150 hours was the top of the red line. The gray line was a comparison if we were to normalize hours. And when I say normalize hours, TerraCare last year we had 650 hours with them at $58 an hour. Once we exceeded that 650 hours, it went up to $90 an hour. Just for this comparison, I kind of normalized it. And then the blue is just the amounts of snow that we had, or the number of hours we had for each storm. And again, this year we had 1,150 hours. I have a typo on the bottom of the slide. So just to be able to judge how we did in comparison, On average, if you look at Denver, they'll say they get around 69 inches per year. Boulder might be in the 120 range. 2009, 2010, we probably got around 100 inches in this area. Last year, we got about 40 inches. So that's a 250% increase. Equipment hours, we used up, and this doesn't represent 2 storms in April, but we used 1,076 hours for the entire year. Again, lane miles served, we increased our lane miles served by 86%. So essentially, we added 25 lane miles by adding Tier 3. Right, I take that back. Yeah, that's right. Lane miles driven, we increased our lane miles driven by 37%. So we did approximately 6,800 lane miles last year, about 9,400 this year. Total cost, we were within $5,000 last year. So last year we plowed Tier 1 through Tier 2. This year we plowed Tier 1 to Tier 3. So we're at about $5,000, pretty close, 1% increase. And then the cost per lane mile, if you look at that, they're looking through some of the previous analysis. We had some Louisville numbers, and I think they're around $25 per lane mile to do their snow plowing in-house. Last year we were at $35 per hour, and that was kind of one of the discussions was we can reduce our cost per lane mile by going in-house. And I think we were able to make some changes this year and reduce our cost per lane mile down to around 25, close to what our neighbor does in-house. So I think in looking at what we've accomplished and the value based on dollars per mile, I think we come close to addressing the Tier 3, whether we should do it in-house or out-of-house. Really, for the success of what I believe this winter was, we keep outsourcing. So future recommendations moving forward, and again, this is open to comments, but we felt this year went good. We wanted to renegotiate and renew our contract with TerraCare, trying to either get additional hours. Again, we had a heavy snowfall year, so additional hours really may not get us much, but in a heavier year than this year, we would see a gain, or just take away the ceiling on hours. Other things we're trying to do with them right now is see how we can integrate our winter rates with possibly summer rates and use some of that equipment in the summer. So that's some of the negotiations we're having with TerraCare. One of the things we can do to reduce our hours and save on our cost per year with TerraCare is we can do some pre-storm monitoring. So when I say pre-storm monitoring, what happens is usually we know when the storm's going to come. Okay? So we try to judge getting out there a few hours in advance. Or if it's early in the year and it's kind of raining, we're not sure if it's going to freeze over, we'll have trucks out there roaming around. Just so if it does freeze over, and it can happen pretty quickly within an hour or two, we're ready to treat the ice as we can. So we would do some pre-storm monitoring with our staff, kind of reduce hours. We'd again add the town-wise as necessary. And then another thing that happens is after the storms leave and we really plowed the majority of the town, there's a lot of times like the next day the winds will get snow into the chasm and we got to do some touch-up. So we'd look at addressing those things with our staff. So given some of the supplemental staff plowing, we have an F-250 pickup that's a 2008, and we'd like to add one more so that we can put 2 large pickup trucks on the road with a plow and salt to do some of this supplemental plowing. Additional concerns I've heard, and so I put them out there so that we can have the discussion if necessary. TerraCare's contract requirements, response times, or how often they're plowing, or when they're plowing. De-icing materials, we use ice slicer and magnesium chloride. We have a partnership with the CDOT facility so that we don't have to maintain the components at our own yard. It's a reduction in our costs. They use certain materials and we go with them and use the materials that they use. And they have worked well for us. However, I do realize there may be some concerns with those things, and we can talk about that. Primarily magnesium chloride and concrete degradation. So, with that, we can open things up and have a discussion in whichever direction you want to go.
Great, thanks. Questions? Barbara?
Yeah, I'm curious to know the supplemental costs for the staff being involved in the plowing?
Sure.
Is that in these costs? or
It is
that-
not in these costs. When we did it twice, we plowed our supplemental time was about 3 to 4 hours of staff time for 2 to 3 employees. And I could add those up. I haven't added those up. It would be pretty minimal, less than
It'd be useful to
$1,000
have that.
probably,
Yeah,
for the entire year.
right.
That was times 3, right?
No, just $1,000 total.
Oh, okay. So you could maybe come up with those costs pretty easily.
I could, yeah, I could. If you'd like to get that as a supplemental report, I can provide that.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Sandy?
I would like a little more information on the concrete degradation and the mag chloride. Is that something you've been able to document? Does the science confirm that, or what's your experience and your opinion on that?
So it is well documented. The science does confirm that magnesium chloride can contribute to concrete degradation. CDOT's done several reports on this material, along with other materials for de-icing, liquid de-icers. Most recent was February of last year, and they really want to look at alternatives to sodium chloride salt and the magnesium chloride liquid de-icers. The science does show that the magnesium chloride can have a chemical reaction with the concrete. And if you put sodium chloride and magnesium chloride and several of the other de-icers in some test solutions, you test it, magnesium chloride is shown to be the most destructive. But that's in some very, I shouldn't say very, but it's like a 15% solution where maybe out in the real world you're less than 1%, maybe 0.1%. So it's diluted when we're using it in the field. And maybe to bring some benchmark to this, as a town, we really try and limit our usage of it. The areas where we primarily use it is up here on the chasm at the hill, and then at the hill by 128. We haven't used it in the neighborhoods. We just use it on some of these tough areas. When we do use it, it's when it gets cold. We don't do a pre-wet where you go in some areas. Some towns you see them pre-wet. We don't do a pre-wet. Basically, when we use it is when the temperature gets cold. So the salt will work, say, between 10 and 20 degrees, and depending on wind chill and whatnot. And then pretty soon that salt will stop working because it gets too cold to activate. So then we add the magnesium chloride to it, and it might activate the salt down to 0 to 10 degrees. So we get a little more capability out of it. So those are the times we use it. How it affects the concrete is more of a function of the quality of the concrete out there. So I think in a lot of the neighborhoods where people are seeing concrete deteriorate, if you put in concrete, it'll be air entrained, which means there's a ton of little air bubbles, just millions of little air bubbles within the concrete. It creates voids within the concrete. So when you go through that freeze-thaw cycle, the ice has room to grow. Well, the other portion of the concrete quality is the amount of water in concrete that affects the strength. So if you have a contractor that comes in and the concrete's not air entrained, and had a high amount of water, which makes the concrete easier to work, and they don't do a good job of finishing the concrete, then you have a low-grade concrete. And I think if we've all had experience with developers, they like to make profits off their houses, and sometimes some of the materials left behind with the owners aren't the premium materials. So I think some areas around town where we're seeing degradation is more of a function of low-quality concrete than it is a reaction to the magnesium chloride.
Two follow-up questions. So in places then, not in the critical places that you described, you still use sand and salt?
We try. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We try not to use sand. We use ice slicer, which is it's a complex chloride is how they describe it. It's essentially a complex salt, and it is abrasive in nature, more abrasive than the salt. So we use that in lieu of the sand. It tends to break down faster. It melts the ice, and we don't have as much residue left over. We use sand a little bit in the beginning of the year, and then we had one storm where we and CDOT had a miscommunication with the vendor, ran out of salt or ice slicer for a day, so we used sand on one storm. So there would have been one storm where you saw a lot of sand.
So ice slicer is different from
It is
that
different.
chloride?
So ice slicer, yeah, let me explain that. So ice slicer is the salt. It's the rock salt. It's not rock salt,
Right.
but that's how it's said. Magnesium chloride is liquid. It's in liquid tanks. So our plows, if you were to look at them from behind, they have a big V box, aluminum box. The salt's in that. If you look tucked into the bed on the side, we have plastic tanks, and the liquid de-icer is actually in there. So we can spread the salt, ice slicer, and we can spray down the liquid out of the same trucks. So they're two different things. Primarily, we use the ice slicer.
The second question was, if we're seeing the noticeable effects on driveways, what about the understructure of the town, stuff, the runoff that goes underneath? Or should we expect deterioration of that as well?
I don't think a significant amount. The CDOT studies have shown maybe it's like 10 yards off the road. You can see a significant impact. And more so to vegetation than hardscape structures. So your grasses or trees or things. And we try to talk with parks throughout the year to see how they think things are hanging on. And we do try to minimize our usage in sensitive areas. So I don't think it's doing anything to the infrastructure underground. And I want to close out what I started saying about the CDOT report in 2009. The recommendations that came out of that were basically CDOT should still use magnesium chloride because there really wasn't a better alternative identified. They recommend to continue the study into a phase 2 study, but that hasn't been completed. And I'm not even sure if they even started it. So, at this point in time, that's really the best thing we have. There's other de-icers out there. There's another de-icer at CDOT's yard. It's called Caliber, and it's a corn-based liquid de-icer. It's got about 30% magnesium chloride in it, and we've tried that a little bit, not a lot. There's other studies out there that have looked at the Caliber de-icer, and it could have impacts to the waterways. It's got high levels of phosphorus, and possibly ammonia in it, so that it can have a different set of impacts to the streams versus our surface. So it's a balance between safety, nature, cost, a lot of factors.
Other questions? Just a quick question about the cost. The cost, is it 240,000 or so for the cost?
We spent about 230 this year.
230, and it's about the same last year, and that includes everything, what goes on the road, the trucks, the labor.
That's TerraCare costs. We spent $40,000 this year in ice slicer, and I think last year we may have spent the numbers. I'll get that to you as supplemental information along with the staff time.
Okay.
The numbers, if you look back historically, don't necessarily line up because at different points in time, we would pay CDOT's one thing, then we'd pay the vendor one thing, and it was kind of a mix. Now we've gone to we pay the vendor, and then we put it in CDOT's yard. So I'll try to do it as best apples to apples I can.
Is it possible to also compare costs prior to using this vendor, so we see comparing everything, apples to apples, going back the last 4 years?
Yeah, we can try to do that.
Is that possible, Scott?
Yeah. There are a number of different cost centers. There's snow plowing.
Right.
And Kurt's accurate. I think this year's budget, $238,000. That's a combination of the equipment rental, which we commit to in advance, whether we use it or not. This year it was for 1,150 hours, and roughly $171,000 for the equipment rental. And then there's a variable cost for labor. We're charged $58 an hour for the first 1,150 hours. If we were to consume more than that, then the hourly rate for the equipment and the labor goes to roughly $90 or $96 an hour. But that's all in one line item. And then you have another for snow removal supplies, and I believe the budget this year was either $39,000 or $40,000, and that's for the salt, sand, ice slicer, anything that we might apply to the roads.
Okay.
But yes, we can pull historical numbers, and we've shared that with the board in the past.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Tandy?
The equipment, did we not buy the equipment last year?
No, we did not.
But we do want to buy the pickup this year and forego the truck?
Exactly. And
Tell
this-
us a little what that would be used for.
Well, right now we have a 250 pickup. I think it's a 2001 or a 2003, so it's aged. It's a replacement vehicle. It's actually a vehicle we drive now with the transmission slipping. We haven't made the investment in it just because it's at that point in time. So it would be a vehicle that we would replace anyways. We may have considered replacing it with more of a lighter duty, like the Ranger style pickup trucks, maybe around a $15,000 to $20,000 price range. Instead, we've decided to up that to the $250, heavier duty. We can pull heavier things, haul heavier things with that pickup, put the plows on it. When we want to use it for the spot control, we're going to have a salt spreader on the back. So we got a heavy plow in the front. We've got a bed full of salt in the back. So if that gets heavy, you're going up big hills. We want something a little more heavy duty.
Lisa?
To follow up on that, and it would be plowing which things?
It would not necessarily, it would be plowing anything outside of Tier 1 through Tier 3. That vehicle would. In addition, it would be roaming before storms, so that if it's kind of raining, we think it's going to freeze over, and we just need to do some spot control, we can roam and not have TerraCare here roaming. It would take care of the end of snowstorms, when the storm's gone, and we just need to do spot control in McCaslin. These trucks are not heavy duty enough to take on Tier 1 through Tier 3 on their own, so it doesn't replace TerraCare.
And it's not the kind of thing that, you're using ATVs to do the pathways? Or what are you doing the pathways with again?
We've upgraded. They're more like John Deere Gators now because we were having difficulty maintenance and some employee injuries because of the very lightweight ATVs. They just couldn't move that much snow. But generally, the plow blade width and the like, no, you're not going to put a truck on the trails.
I had a few other questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, the ones that weren't asked. One of the questions I had that I think was a point of confusion in the past, and I was wondering how we were working it now, was the issue of communication, and how do we now, is it written into the contract exactly when these folks get on the road, or is it something where a call comes from people? I remember in the past it was a call and confusion and whatever, so what's the procedure for when they get out on the road?
It varies per storm. It's a case-by-case basis. If you read the contract, they're not supposed to plow until we've received 2 inches.
Till they what?
Till we've received 2 inches.
Thanks.
So by contract, they shouldn't plow till 2 inches is on the ground. So a typical storm or a case would be we're watching the weather, just like the rest of you on the news. It says, okay, big storm coming in. Looks like it's going to move in around 1 or 2. We have a subscription to AccuWeather's website that we can kind of gauge, see when they're predicting the levels. Is it going to just all hit real quick, or is it going to ramp up slowly? So if it looks like it's going to ramp up slow, we might bring one truck in maybe a few hours before the storm, let them roam. When they start seeing the roads start to deteriorate, then they'll call in another truck. Early in the year, we might send them out when it's raining at midnight, where the temperatures are supposed to dip around 2 or 3 in the morning. They'll be there in case it gets icy. So those are some different things we do. Sometimes we'll say, well, it's going to be less than 2-inch storm, maybe an inch. It's just going to be a dusting, and we won't put anybody out because we think it'll be fine. But then we'll coordinate with Boulder County Sheriff, and we'll say, hey, we're not deploying tonight, but if you see something out there that's getting dangerous, then go ahead and make the call to deploy. So it's been a team effort.
Okay, so.
Is there a policy exactly for each
Yes, that's
storm?
what.
No.
Okay, thanks. In follow-on to Trustee Henson's question about asking for some additional data, one additional piece I'd be really interested in is not just a comparison to Louisville's, did you say $25 per mile? But I don't care if miles are hard to get or something like that. I don't care if it's per population or something like that, but I'd be interested in knowing comparison to more than just one community. So
Okay.
if we can get that. And then how, you're asking about a renegotiation of the contract and renewal. The contract itself is, when we bid, it was 3 years with its annual renewals, or how does it work?
It's an annual renewal.
That's it?
Yep.
And we go out every 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? What's the?
Our policy is no less frequently than every 4 years. We've just finished our second.
Thanks.
Anything else?
One thing I would add about TerraCare is that they do service Centennial, Castle Pines, E470, so they bring depth to the table as well.
and 470 is always great. So,
You
no
can-
complaints
you
about
can get to the
470,
airport
man.
no matter what.
That's the way I look at it. I don't worry about that.
But it's empty, too.
It's great.
So I had just a couple of questions. So you talked about the summer plan. How is that formulation going? Is that, you feel pretty confident that that's going to be beneficial, or where are you at in that thinking process?
We just received their price schedule, their rates for different equipment and labor. It's average. It's not outside of, it's not expensive, but it's not cheap. It's probably right in the middle of prices that we see around town. So I haven't really had, I just got that a week ago. I haven't had a lot of time to get back with them on it. So one of the discussions is maybe, do we just pay for labor because we paid a retainer for the trucks in the winter? Can we apply that retainer to the summer? So just some different back and forth that we just haven't had yet.
Sure. And so do you think that would be part of the upcoming budget cycle as a recommendation about what to do with the summer schedule?
It may have some impact to budget, but not a big impact. One of the things that made me recommend trying TerraCare to do Tier 3 was when I looked at historical costs, what I heard when I came in and learning the staff and what we've done was that we spent a lot of money on rentals, and we are always renting dump trucks, and we're going to save all this money. But when I really looked at it, I didn't feel like we spent a lot of money on rentals, and there wasn't, compared to the cost of buying equipment, it just didn't justify it. I mean, we're talking 10 to 20,000 over the course of the entire
And then you
year.
lack the flexibility, too,
Yeah.
to get what you really need.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, we do sacrifice some convenience, but again, I think we're trying to negotiate. I mean, with TerraCare, we've got the option of local contractors, so we've got several avenues to look at.
So, but that would, I guess I'd like to see it as part of Public Works recommendation to the manager when the manager is developing your budget, this, to have a separate line item that this is your recommendation, and then we can have a policy discussion about it. It'd be good to know.
Okay.
In terms of de-icer on Tier 3 streets, do you use that every time you're out there, or is there, because here's my thinking. So, one, there's a cost associated with the de-icer that's being applied on Tier 3. Tier 3 usually don't plow down to the ground, as far as I can tell. I mean, you basically have a way that you can get down the street. And then at the end of the day, then you have to pick it all up for after the storm is done, and so there's another cost associated with it. So do you have a policy about how to do that in Tier 3?
No, we kind of work with what the environment's doing.
Mhm.
It's, we try not to use it. We
Okay.
try to not use the ice slicer and any liquid de-icer in the neighborhoods just because of the residual. But if it gets very slippery, and we think there's safety concerns, we'll drop it. Some of the intersections, some of the hills.
Great. And then I just have to ask, it's not really related to this current discussion, but the last storm, which obviously paralyzed a big section of the Front Range, not just the town of Superior, there was difficulties on McCaslin and 128. It's probably, the main part was probably 128, I guess, but we've had several issues where people get stuck there, have to get, towed out of that hill there. Is there a way to prevent that from occurring, or do you have a feeling of why that occurs?
In that particular storm, we thought that storm was going to come in a little later. It was supposed to ramp up slow. And it just slammed us hard about 4:30, just before rush hour. Mr. Bagley stuck around until about 8:30, and then he was kind of watching things, and I came back in about 8:30, and we made the decision to plow town-wide. TerraCare already had 3 trucks, but we got about 18 inches of snow, I think, in about a 3 to 4 hour range. And there's just a lot of snow that came down. It came down at a time when there's a lot of traffic on the road. And, we weren't ready for that impact of a snowstorm, and I don't think anyone else in the Front Range was
Sure.
ready either.
So would that be one of the areas where you do this pre-application or whatever if you had town trucks? Is that something that you would do with the 250, or is that something you'd ask TerraCare to do?
With that particular storm, I don't think there's a lot we could have done to change the outcome. I mean, we could just be more conservative in the future and have Terra. We knew it had the possibility to be a big storm later in the evening, and we could just advance our roaming with TerraCare. That kind of takes away how we supplement with staff. The big storms, if they're going to move in and ramp up slowly, we have time to make the call to have the trucks come in. but if the big storms come in fast, then we do have some response time issues and we can't get behind.
I guess from my perspective, it would be good to be a little on the, apply a little early, maybe a little too much to prevent, whatever we can. So just, from this hill and then on the wall, if you will, from Morgul, Bismarck lingo.
Sure.
So,
Some things we can explore. Right? I've thought about this issue and how do we deal with that. I think one way we could have our own trucks out running. We could have TerraCare come in earlier. If we know it's going to be big and we're concerned about response times, we can even get into reimbursables with hotels. So we know we've got all the crews here somewhere. And so when it really hits, everybody's here. There's a variety of things we could explore.
But maybe if it's not even going to be big, but it's going to be really cold and freeze.
yeah,
That's
what
when you do it.
I don't want to be junior public
Right.
works director here.
Yeah, no,
but you know where I'm coming from.
I understand.
And then I guess my only comment is Tier 3 plowing was hugely well received within the community, and it was really a great thing. So if it's
Got
within
minimal
our
cost.
control, man, I think that we clearly need to do that again, because that was a great benefit. Sandy?
So this is where new is a disadvantage here. So where do we go from here? What is the next step?
So I think that should be, my recommendation would we have this as a discussion during budgeting, so that, we can either take, basically what would happen if we don't use TerraCare for Tier 3 plowing, what we could do is decrease the hours that we would rent their equipment from, so you'd have a cost reduction potentially. But for this type of level, I think my recommendation would be to kind of keep where we're at, but that's how that process, at least from my recommendation, would occur.
When do we renegotiate with TerraCare? When does the old, at the budget
We
cycle?
can hold off any contract approvals till after budget season. We can negotiate with them and say, hey, what's our best value you can provide us, and then we can submit that.
We learned on that in 2007. We don't want to enter the snow season without a contract
don't
or
go
under
late.
contract.
Right,
We'll-
right.
We will
It's
be back to you,
expensive.
but that was the purpose of this discussion.
September is snow season.
We're currently having discussions with them. We laid out in the memo for you what it is we hope to accomplish. Assuming that we can accomplish that, we can get some or all of these. Expect that we will be coming back to you with a proposal to renew with TerraCare. If for some reason we can't, we'll go back out into the marketplace and get the best deal we can, whether it's them or somebody else. But we also wanted to share with you, because it has been a source of great discussion over the course of the last 2+ years, about the fleet enhancement. It's off the table. We're not expanding the fleet. We are replacing one piece of budgeted equipment, but at a lesser profile or lesser extent, and buying a couple of ancillary pieces of equipment. But instead of spending $190,000, we expect to spend $50,000 current year on capital fleet replacement, and no expansion of the fleet.
Great, thanks.
Nice.
Do you want to take a
Excellent
quick
job
break,
for
or is everybody good?
Last year.
Thanks.
Quick break? Yes, all right. Yep. 1 minute, would be great. I'd like to call to order a regular meeting of the Town of Superior Board of Trustees for May 17th, 2010. And Phyllis, if you call the roll.
Mayor Andrew Muckle,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Elia Gagoras,
Here?
Trustees Joe Sorelli,
Here.
Chris Hansen,
Here.
Sandy Pennington,
Here.
Lisa Skumatz,
Here.
Deborah Williams,
Here.
Town Manager Scott Randall,
Here.
Town Attorney Kendra Carberry,
Here.
Town Clerk Phyllis Harden here.
Great, thanks. Item number 3, approval of agenda. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as stands by Trustee Skumat, second by Trustee Sorelli. Further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous, thank you very much. Item number 4, reports, questions, and issues. Trustee Hansen, would you like to start?
Sure. I attended OSAC meeting last week to get to know them, learn a little bit more. It was interesting. Also attended the CML Effective Governance Resources and Skills for Elected Officials training. It was really good. I wish it would have gone a little bit longer. They let us go about 2 o'clock, and we could have gone till 5. But they introduced CIRSA to us and discussed liability and basics for elected officials. We reviewed ethics and conflicts. And we also did a little scenario exercise where we broke up into teams and had to discuss the scenario. So very informative, so I'm looking forward to doing more. A couple quick questions. Scott, on your weekly digest, on the numbers that you had, it's great, but I'm wondering, are those numbers coming from a couple of big stores, so the increases are happening, say, from Target and Costco, or is it coming from across the board?
Across the board. That's why I tried to give you the generalities. We're not at liberty to release
Right.
individual stores, but I give you the summary that we had good performance in, I think, this past month. It was particularly big box, most of the mid-sized boxes, and there were a couple of other sectors that were all, across the
Okay.
board, double-digit increases. So, no, this was not a product of one or even a handful of...
Okay, so we're not seeing erosion from the smaller guys? Okay.
No.
Okay. And then, Kendra, I had a question for you.
Sure.
Are we able to include any committee chairs in our executive sessions if we have a discussion that's specific to an issue that they're working on?
You are able to, yes, you are, but you just have to be careful about it. I guess that's my advice. First of all, for personnel, the answer is no. You can never have another individual in an executive session if you're discussing a personnel issue, other than the person that you're discussing, but no other third parties. I would also be careful if you invite someone else into an executive session for attorney-client privilege, because their presence waives the privilege. So I would not recommend that. If you're talking about land acquisition, for example, we just need to be careful, because the more people we involve in the
Right.
discussion, the more people that know about the negotiations.
So if we wanted to make sure that everybody is on the same page, not inviting the whole crew, but
Right.
perhaps just the chairman. Okay.
Now, the other issue to remember is that that person is not at liberty to share anything that's discussed in the executive session back with his or her committee.
Right.
So
Okay.
they could participate and transfer the views of the committee to you, but it can't go the other way
Okay.
until you, as a board, specifically authorize them to release that information.
So a question about that then. Executive session is to not have public discussion of these issues.
Right.
Do you swear
Is
somebody
there a form
into
of-
executive session so that they are aware that that's an issue, or how does that work?
Some cities do have a statement that's made at the beginning of the executive session that states that all parties present during the executive session realize this is confidential, cannot be released to the public, cannot be discussed in public. And if you do involve third parties, I would recommend making that kind of statement on the record, just so that everybody is aware of it.
Okay. I would,
Could there be a form that they could sign? Would that be helpful?
I guess my recommendation is not to make work for the attorney, but this would be a good time for a memo to discuss these issues and how they should proceed.
Specifics.
I'd be happy to. And yes, a form is another idea that they could fill out.
In addition. Do we have head nods on that? Sure.
I'd be happy to address that in a moment.
Okay.
That would be more the exception rather than the rule, to invite somebody outside. Just
And generally, across the board, it is more the exception
Yeah.
than the rule. So.
so.
And at the end of the day, if you can't, if it's for a communication tool that you can't use to communicate with anybody, then you just have to wonder what you're going to end up achieving. Mrs. Sorelli, sorry.
Two things. First, just to follow up to our briefing last week on Morgul Bismarck. My informal feedback from those involved are that they can still use more volunteers. All the viewing public, all of us up here, don't be bashful about chiming in to volunteer. Secondly, this is a little bit ahead of Scott's report because I assume he's going to go over the agenda for our next meeting during his report, but I notice one of the things that potentially is on that agenda is appointments to advisory committees, and that would be a meeting on June 14th, and I'm not, do we want to get together and interview anybody, or do we need to, or what kind of steps do we need to take between now and then if we were going to make appointments?
I guess it
Just
depends on
wondering.
how many people have we signed up.
You received that report a week or so ago. There have been, to the best of my knowledge, no additions, though at the last meeting, the board asked that a deadline, and I believe the deadline is a week from Friday, and we are doing some additional outreach. There will be another newsletter that goes out. I've arranged for some e-blasts to go out to advise more of the community of these opportunities. I mean, it's been on Channel 8, and it's been on the website and all of the rest, but some additional calls for public service, if you will, to advise of all the appointments. And then once you have your pool, then the board can handle it. As it last stood, the information I shared with you about a week and a half ago, I believe there was one group that had more applicants than vacancies.
That would be
ProStack,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So how would we handle
Well,
interviews?
I guess, can we try to do that informally between now and then, or?
Yeah, I mean, after we have achieved the deadline, and maybe there will be a mad rush with applications, and if that's the case, then, we can have a discussion about what to do. Yeah, I'd love to have a mad rush about applications, but, so I guess we can do that informally. And
I think it's
go from
pretty
there.
clear I'm guessing we'd want interviews at least for ProStack.
If I could interject here, I'm wondering if the public interviews we just did on ProStat, or you guys did, and I watched, are not a little bit intimidating to an applicant and sort of an off-putting thing. Is it possible that we could do that a different way so we don't turn people off?
One time we did it, we just sat in chairs right down there. If it's the dais problem that you're, if you're feeling like this is the off-putting thing, we've done it where we just sat in chairs right.
I think the
that dais,
TV weren't the interviews on TV as well? But yeah, I actually do think any sort of a more friendly thing where people feel less exposed perhaps is better.
It's hard for us to get together.
Yeah, and in fact, I wrote up in my reports here that I wanted to talk about the public interview process for the advisory boards and how that's kind of an intimidating process if you're having to come to the podium during a public meeting, and for an advisory board that like OSAC or ProStack.
Trustee Skumatz, you had, is there anything else?
No.
I think I saw a hand. It might be the Jeff Chu
On this
hand.
issue,
I
you
think,
mean?
on this particular issue.
Pen.
Not on this issue, on
Pen
this
was
issue.
It was the pen, yes.
So
Mr.
sorry.
Randall, you're leaning forward.
Yeah. Part of the situation that you described is relatively new, because before July of last year, the board did not televise its workshop sessions.
Right.
The board is not allowed to conduct interviews in private, is not allowed to conduct executive sessions on advisory board and commission appointments. So if you want to go less formal, it would have to be a subcommittee of the board to do the first meeting. One of the things we talked about back in April was going back to the recommendation and consent process, which eliminates the intimidation factor. So you've got a number of options, but
Well, is it a possibility that we could have the actual committees review the applicants,
you can do anything the board wants to do.
especially so that they have some kind of input before the board makes any kind of decision?
Which is, but I go back to, and I would just remind you that you've asked all of the existing incumbents to reapply.
Trustee Squamats, I do see the pen.
I'd like to be the whole board still interviewing. I think that that's really valuable for us. And if making it less scary would be going to a meeting just in those chairs and just making that simple change, I think that is, it's a pretty big step toward not being quite as intimidating. That would be my preference as opposed to having another arrangement, at least as a first step, if we can make that work. That would be my preference.
Can we ask the committee chair's opinion, or is that sort of,
We can,
since I know we have one here, I don't know, does the board choose to keep that as its domain, or
Well,
what's the experience been?
well, the board has to appoint these people, so
Right.
at the end of the day, the board has to make a decision. As the manager said, we can do this if we want them to give us, or, run it by them and give it to us, or give it as a subcommittee, that's all fine, but we just need to make sure that we
Right.
understand how we're going to proceed.
Having sat in on committees, I think that a committee chair does add the perspective of knowing how a particular candidate differentiates the opinion from what's existing on the committee, and might be able to provide a little clue as to sort of that diversification issue.
Trustee Squamats?
One thing that would be useful, I think, for people who are returning or something would be some independent report or something about attendance or stuff like that, some of the basics. But I'm not sure how much opinion as opposed to sort of facts.
Right.
That line makes me nervous.
Right. Well, I'd just be interested. I'm sort of thinking we don't necessarily want the committee to have the ability to cut somebody out of consideration, but to share their perspective, I think, would enrich the conversation, for me at least.
Trustee Williams, I believe I see a pencil.
It's going up high, too. And so I get the feeling that maybe we need a definitive process in place for appointing vacant seats and doing it in a timely manner of some sort, because we don't actually have a process.
We've historically
As
That's
is
what
pretty
you're questioning
plain
it now.
and clear. So I wonder if that may be the first way to go as far as figuring out all the different avenues of how we want to go about this, if we had a process.
Trustee Gagos?
I'd just be interested in hearing from a committee chair your opinion on this, since you moved a lot closer to the mic.
Thank you. Jim Payne, 2475 Clayton Circle. I chair ProStac and also serve on OSAC, so I have perspective from those two committees. I've spoken to some of you individually about this. I'm a little bit concerned about some of the steps we're taking. I would suggest that we look at the objective and understand the objective and allow the committees to provide some input into the process. For example, putting all members up for reappointment has the potential for, first of all, discouraging a lot of people from coming out in the first place if they know that after 2 years or 3 years after that first term, they might be bumped off for some reason, which theoretically could be a political reason. And I think that it also would hurt the committees if we lose valuable input. It takes, almost a term before people really get familiar with all of the issues. ProStac's a lot of different issues we cover. OSAC has parcels and open space things that take some time to learn. So I think there's a risk in bumping people off too soon, and I'd rather just see a little bit more thought, so that we might say, look at the length of the term, get input on maybe there should be 2 terms, and then a process, something that would not simply say someone's going to serve 1 term and then be bumped off, because I think that will have a detrimental effect on recruiting people for these committees.
Trustee Squamats?
I think it's a toughie because it might be in the first term that it becomes apparent that the person is not working.
Well, that's different.
And so I'm nervous about saying, we don't re-interview people who are.
In the in the last go-around, 18 months or so, when we looked at some of the guidelines for the committees and commissions, that was addressed, if you remember. And I think the committees were all for some process to review situations where people just didn't show up or there was some real serious performance issue. I'm all for that, and the committees, I think, were all on record, and there was some procedure. What we said was we wouldn't make it automatic, but if someone missed, for example, 3 meetings in a row, we would then have a process where they would be talked to and they'd have to reaffirm their interest and understand what the cause of those absences were. So that's a little different. I'm in favor of that completely.
I'm confused about how we draw the line then between the two, how we make the distinction.
What I thought we were
process.
talking about here is that when someone's term is up, after their appointed term is up, that they would then go back in and reapply with everybody else. And I'm suggesting
Those term is
that-
up that year also, and, yeah. Not everybody else, but the ones who are also up that year.
No, I mean, that they would then be on essentially an even keel with somebody who came in.
Like new applicants.
Not an even keel, though, they'd have experience. Their experience would be much greater. So-
I don't think
I
we
guess-
made that leap. I think
No.
we thought they would be given
Prior
priority,
Well, then
but
I-
not necessarily
I guess what I'm saying,
certitude.
not to, I'd be happy to go back and forth on this, but I'm just saying that I'm suggesting that we give some thought to the process, allow the committees and the committee chairs and all of the committees. There was some spirited discussion of this issue at the OSAC meeting just this last week, and come up with a process that makes sense, that meets your goals. We're here to serve you, so it has to be what you want, but I think there could be some unintended consequences from moving too quickly and not really defining. The other thing I would say is that we need to do this faster. We went without a member from November to just this last month, and I know the election got in the way and that kind of thing, but that has been more the that has not been an exception. We've had that before. So the process must allow us to get people quickly, because if we don't have those positions filled, it's harder to get quorums. We then lose momentum. We've lost the value of one person's input. So I also think that the timing needs to be sort of hardwired into the process.
I mean, I think the interviewing has to take place before the expiration almost. If we know somebody's term expires June 1st, I think the month of May, we need to start doing some interviewing.
And one of the things I've suggested, I would, like you to consider, is that one of the criteria be having people come to meetings before they're appointed. So if one of the goals is to get broader participation, let's make it clear that anyone can come to these meetings. Most of the time, you can sit right at the table. We want everyone's input equally with everyone else's. There are very few things that are decided by one vote. So I think that gives you a great basis to evaluate someone and their interest. And then when they come on the committee, you know that they know what they're getting into. We've had problems with people coming on the committee who really didn't know what they were getting into.
Plus, then you achieve the great benefit of more resident input.
You encourage them. You say, "Come on,
Absolutely.
come on out if you're interested, and see if you like it, and we'll see if everybody likes your participation." And some people have done that, and I think it's been very healthy for the committees.
Well, and that would be something that would show up in their interview as well.
Exactly.
I attended, 4 meetings
exactly.
before I ever,
But
have a pretty good sense of what's going on.
I understand that people have been told, get your applications in because there are committee openings on ProStack. Now, I'm also concerned about misrepresenting the openings to those people. If they understand it's an open process on it has not been explained to them that committee members in good standing are likely to be reappointed. So I think it's important to make that clear to potential applicants. Exactly, it's almost more important for them than anyone else what the process is going to be, so they feel they're fairly treated.
So, just to wrap this up, we need to make a decision before what we're going to do at the next meeting. And the question is whether or not we want to have, I want to make sure that we know what we're going to do now, and then we can explore this in the future about how we're going to do it long term. But if we have, say that, I'm just hypothetically speaking, we have the only committee that we have additional people to, we'd have to cut, or if you will, are we going to do that through a entire board discussion, or not? And then are we going to do that on that meeting in June? So, feelings about that, Trustee Pennington?
I would like to propose that we just adopt as a matter of course that the chairman of that committee, that group, if it's Planning Commission or whoever, ProStack, OSAC, have the ability to first interview, even in those instances where we have one opening and one applicant for that opening, because it doesn't necessarily mean that that applicant is well-suited for that committee, does it, by definition, mean that?
Right.
I mean,
So that's one question, but the other question is, what's the board's process going to be then for this upcoming one?
if we have the committee do the preliminary vetting, can that committee then give us a memo with their suggestion on it? Is that allowed? So that we know?
Whatever you want.
Okay, so we would have that suggestion, and it sounds to me, like I said, I'm not interested in nuking anybody at the committee phase. I would like them to be have the ability to be brought forward if they choose to continue in the process. So I actually like Lisa's idea of just making it a little more friendly and having us sit out there. You're telling me, Scott, that we need to have it on TV because it's an
If we're
official
going to do
process,
it,
right?
so if the board is going to do it, and we have more than 2 members here, it's a published meeting.
Right.
So then it's an open meeting, and then we've had the process where we always record and televise work sessions. I think we need to not do it like, well, for this one, we're not going to televise it. You know, we need to make sure that we have a pretty standard process. So my impression of what's going to happen is that, you know, we can certainly ask the committee chairman, and that at the next meeting, next work session, we would need to interview people like we have in the past. And, you know, if we want to try to do that at the roundtable, fine. You know, we talk about that periodically. It's maybe more friendly. It's hard to see on television and record, but we could certainly give that a whirl. So Phyllis says, wow, Phyllis, you're jumping in. Hang on. Hold the phone.
I think there's an issue with the mics. If you're going to
That's my understanding. Is
It
that
won't be good quality broadcast, but
So what?
Trustee Skumas.
But we could potentially just turn one mic that way and one mic this way and work at these 2 mics. I think it's cluster around. We've done a horseshoe around that in the past. I think it worked out great.
Okay, so that's my going to be my recommendation, unless I hear strong negative to that.
I want to understand what we're saying about the reappointments.
So for ProStack only, and not to necessarily, I think we have time to talk about these other issues, but for ProStack only, we're recommending that the chairman have a coffee. I mean, I don't think you need to have anything more formal than that, and talk to people about what's that, and if you have impressions, you can send us a memo, and that at the next work session, we will have a warm and fuzzy roundtable, and that we probably won't be appointing people that night because people want to process that interview, and so that would then come back to the next meeting. So that's what I'm seeing in my head. Trustee Skumas.
One question is, are we interviewing people turn by turn, or are you thinking we're going to have a group discussion? My preference is turn by turn.
I mean, by turn.
I mean, we interview one person.
As opposed to having
Everyone's not
a
sitting
table
there.
and everybody's in. Trustee.
I think it's better if we interview a person at a time.
That's fine.
And I thought it was kind of weird when the other person was sitting in the room at the same time. So
agree.
I would prefer that the people come in turn.
We can ask them to do it. It's clearly an open
Good point.
meeting, so we can't say you can't come in.
That's
right?
a good point.
And they can watch on television in the lobby as opposed
Yes.
to being in the room.
It still was
So
weird.
If it was me, I'd want to adopt good answers the other person.
yes, exactly. Sort of League of Women Voters thing, right?
Yeah.
We learned from the previous answers.
Mayor, could we go so far, if that issue's settled, to suggest to the committee chairpersons that if they would like to submit a plan, a proposed plan to us for committee appointments, so that we can mull it over, modify, et cetera, and come up with a
We can.
little more of a
Everybody here
deliberate process?
has a liaison to their specific
Right.
committee. I would say that when you have that, when you liaise, if that's a verb, see what their
Right.
suggestion is, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
Okay?
Nothing
Trustee
else?
Sorelli, thank you.
That conversation.
So, in a sort of
Aye.
timely manner, if your committee has already had their monthly meeting,
You
you'll
could,
be able to make that.
you could liaise telephonically,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Trustee Skumatz.
So, there was a hazardous waste and electronics collection event on Saturday, and it was massively well attended, and there were cars out almost into the street, and people were very happy with it. I had one suggestion that we add a different material next time, which I'll pass along to the Sustainability Committee, or whatever the new, I can never remember the initials. And yeah, I think that's right, RCAC. And that specifically was confidential material that we would shred, and that the shred would be recycled. So that's a suggestion that was made. People said they'd been saving it up for years, waiting for that. So
I had to drive, I don't know, some 20 miles to do it the last time.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, it wouldn't be hard to have a truck there.
Yeah.
I just don't know what the cost is, and so we'll look at that next time.
Start putting it in your plastic bags.
That's right. I think, other than the fact that I think this coming Saturday is the weekend where we have the replacement day for the wildlife restoration on Rock Creek. With the only other thing I wanted to mention was that Trustee Pennington and I have been working a bit on trying to follow up on some of the suggestions that we had during the work session and the goals session and all that, looking at processes, and as well as Trustee Sorelli providing input. And we're hoping that on an upcoming work session, we might be able to discuss that process, and we hope to meet with other folks as well.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Let's see, a couple of things. So, meetings I attended are, I didn't attend any meetings since last week. Going to RTD tomorrow to do some testifying regarding the RTD's money into the US 36 project. I have had a letter exchange regarding Section 16, which was brought up earlier, as well as the right-of-way acquisition from the Jefferson Parkway along Indiana. It's part of the, believe, part of the Refuge Act. There's 300 feet of right-of-way available for transportation improvements without being more specific. Various entities have talked about swapping that land for acreage in Section 16. It's a little complicated. Section 16 is a state land board trust, which was set up when, Kendra might be able to help me with this. I think it was actually when the state was created, the federal government granted these properties to the state for educational purposes.
Exactly. Every Section 16 in each section was granted to the state. You're exactly right.
So sometimes I get my history right. Section 16 is this Section 16 is next to the Rocky Flats area, the Fish and Wildlife Refuge. So there's been interest in people acquiring additional open space in that area. So one of the suggestions was, well, why don't we just swap Fish and Wildlife land on Indiana for areas in Section 16 for additional open space? And the letter I wrote electronically, which I can afford to people, is that I think that is a very dangerous position to be in, that we need to have this discussion separately, that we don't want to intertwine Jefferson Parkway, Indiana right-of-way acquisition to potential open space acquisitions in Section 16, because then you have these competing interests, and I just think that that's not a very clear way of doing that. So unless people feel categorically opposed to what I'm saying, is that I'm going to continue to propose that's the town's position. There's also been discussions about, well, you can't, and the attorney can correct me as well, but I don't think you can necessarily acquire land in these state land board trusts. I think they have to be held in perpetuity with some exceptions, perhaps.
I think you're right. I'm not quite certain, but that sounds familiar.
So, it's how to acquire relatively long-term open space in these areas, and trying to come up with some mechanism to do that. So Fish and Wildlife is discussing this, and the State Land Board, and this all involves the natural resource damages funds from the Rocky Flats cleanup and closure. So it's quite complicated, but I just wanted to let people know that that's the position I've taken. And once again, if you're opposed to that, make sure you let me know.
Sounds wonderful.
I guess I'm confused.
It's I wish I could.
I don't understand what's proposed to be swapped.
It depends on if you're Jefferson County and Jefferson Parkway. And I think actually Boulder County might have supported this, but the city of Boulder did not. Is that so along Indiana, as part of the Refuge Act for the Rocky Flats cleanup and closure, there's a 300-foot area that could potentially be used for transportation. And people have said, well, if that's going to be the case, then we want you to swap that for areas in the State Land Board. They're totally different entities, and I don't know how that transaction could ever occur, and I don't think people have actually clarified it. So that's another reason why I think that.
So even though the 300-foot is set aside, it would have to be acquired.
Yeah, it's not set aside. It said that there's potential areas for transportation improvements.
That would have to be acquired.
That probably, and there's no way of, people have, how that acquisition
Now I
has occurred is
understand.
not clear. Probably a purchase of that property at the highest and best use valuation is the way that
Leading
should
you
have occurred.
further into the murky
Yes.
of what none of us understand. Section 16, what can that be used for now, and couldn't that be used as open space now?
So it can be used, the broad picture is that you have to use that to develop income that can be given to the schools.
Oh,
I think, as well as, there's also some complications. I think it also has to do with the state universities can have some of that.
Yes, I think you're right. It's very complicated because of the original intent of the reservation of section 16 in each section. So they're trying to get around that and saying you don't have to have a school on each section 16, but in lieu of having a school on each section 16, you have to use income from the property, and the purposes of the property have to be related to schools.
So the things that can occur, so there's mining. I think it's actually actively occurring or planned to be occurring on that. So you have mineral rights that are being purchased from that. That's one way of developing income. And then, additional development on it potentially. But once again, I think the State Land Board is supposed to hold these in perpetuity. So there's a pretty broad brush about what can occur. But getting back to your question, in the state's constitution regarding the land board, the State Land Board trust lands, is that in addition to develop the most income, you have to preserve, there's some specific language, but it's like preserve and protect the beauty and, open space, I don't remember. That's in the State Land Board, in the state's constitution regarding these lands. And so that would be the argument that I would say, well, this is a public benefit. Well, the schools are not necessarily getting income from it. The region in general is benefiting from it. So, there's no clear-cut answer to that question.
thanks. That clarified a lot.
So, okay, so that's that. There was a suggestion earlier in our work session about having a roundtable with the Open Space Advisory Committee. I don't see any downside to that. I don't see the huge urgency, but sometime that works into the summer schedule. We have a work session regarding that and devote an entire hour, unless people have a problem with that. Let's see. I had a conversation with one of our planning commissioners who did volunteer work with the Sheriff's Department, and he was saying that, well, we might make benefit of the work release program from the jails in terms of painting fences and things like that would potentially be for free. I said I would bring it up. I don't know how people feel. Not necessarily only painting fences, but,
I've got
if you're in Florida or whatever, you see the
I'm
people
happy
in
to
orange
have anybody
jackets
do it.
cleaning up the right-of-way. So, it's, I don't know if people want to explore that anymore or not. You don't have to make a decision tonight. I just wanted to throw that out there. So there was that discussion. And if you want more information, then I could have them forward that information.
I'm
to the
assuming
board.
nonviolent offenders.
Yeah, no, these are clearly nonviolent offenders that are in Boulder County Jail, so, they're not hardened criminals typically.
What
So-
other municipalities have taken advantage of that?
Boulder, I think the county of Boulder. I'm told that they clean up Pearl Street Mall, and you never know that they're actually there. So they're cleaning it up, but, there's a sheriff there watching people, so I think there's a variety of municipalities that are doing it. So I can ask for a pro and con, and, I'm going to say that we're not committed one way or the other, but we can forward that to the board. Yeah. Let's see, I had a suggestion also about the agenda. I don't know that, we don't need to make a decision anytime soon, but in Robert's Rules of Orders, there's new business, old business. I'm thinking in the old business section, maybe we could have the answers to outstanding questions that could be reported upon, that, just as a suggestion. And I was wondering if the town would be willing to, we've had this discussion about the automatic door openers on the front door of the town hall for disability, and whether or not, I think it'd be free just to get an estimate from somebody to how much that would be. I don't see any downside to that. I don't know if the manager has strong feelings about that one way or the other.
We said we'd look at it as part of the 2011 budget.
Okay, perfect. So,
So, Mayor, going back one,
Yes.
on the old business, is that something we have to vote on, or is that something?
we should talk about the agenda. The answer is we don't really need to vote on it. The board just has to have a policy about how their agenda is laid out. So
Okay.
sometime when we have a time to talk about it in a work session again, it's one of the things that we should put on the list of things to talk about. Let's see. And then the only other one is, and we've gone back and forth about cash disbursements. I know that in the organizations like urban drainage, you always have to approve cash disbursements. I don't feel strongly about it, but that's only, I don't know if the manager has, I think it's available to anybody who wants it. I don't know if the attorney actually has an opinion about the approval of cash disbursements, if that's a requirement, or, we've had this conversation, and I've forgotten about it, but every time I do the urban drainage stuff, we are approving cash disbursements, and I just couldn't remind myself of where we left that. So, I know where we left it, which is that it's available, but, so it's something that we could at least think about, so.
What is a cash disbursement?
Cash disbursements are,
Paying a bill.
basically paying
Checks.
bills for X, Y, and Z, so.
And we have a report.
And I don't know, we should, and I'm sorry, because I forgot, I know that we've had an analysis of this, and I think we've talked about which municipalities do what, and so I'm it's just one of those things
Talking
that
about
we
a
should talk
report
about
of
again.
these, is it?
Yeah, basically, it comes, usually in these organizations, it comes under consent agenda approval of the cash disbursements, so that people can see it. So I don't have strong feelings about that one way or the other, but it's something to think about. Trustee Skumatz.
And that was something where there is a report of what the checks have been, and that can be reviewed by us or anybody in the public, from my recollection, because it's been
Right.
questioned in the past, so it's just a matter of us reviewing those before the board meeting.
Right, does the board, or maybe the board wants to have it as a packet, I don't know. The problem with cash disbursements is really there's no communication associated with it, so it can be very confusing and can be misleading. So, you're right,
People might save up for 3 months and
$16,000
then bill.
for,
Yeah.
right, for who knows what, cleaning a gutter. And you're like, well, why did you, then you have this big conversation about why did you spend $16,000 on cleaning a gutter?
Because they didn't bill us for 5 months.
Because
Subject
cash
showed up,
disbursement,
yeah.
they're just basically line items, and so sometimes it's worse than nothing at all. So I just wanted to bring it up especially for new board members to at least think about. That's all I had. Trustee Williams.
I went to an open space meeting in the last week, last Monday, and there were a few things that were brought up. A couple of them that we already discussed, as far as not doing a public interview process, since it is kind of an intimidating process for volunteers. Then also, giving committees a chance to review all the applicants in order to advise the board. And then maybe a definitive process in putting in place for appointing vacant seats in a timely manner for advisory boards. But the main one I want to discuss, the revenue from the public service company easement on Bear Hay. Was wondering legally, where can that revenue go? Does it need to go to the open space fund? Is that where it is planning on going?
I've not asked the question, I'd have to check with the finance director. It's a one-time payment, I believe it was $7,400.
Right, off
Wow.
of the easement that is being purchased by Public Service Company, correct?
The use.
So I'm just wondering if, since that was originally bought by the Open Space Fund, would those monies go into the Open Space Fund?
It's a question I will ask and get you an answer for on Thursday.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Anything else?
Nope.
Trustee
That is it.
Burris?
Thanks.
So I have a big issue to me personally, I think. The town of Superior historically is a town that loves to play tennis. If the courts are available and there's no weather phenomena like snow or rain, and they're not wet, they're usually pretty full. So I really appreciate the town manager's very descriptive history of what's taken place in the last 4 or 5 months with the vendor that was hired to replace Billy Downs Academy. So honestly, since I've been on the board, the Sports Monster vendor is probably an unmitigated disaster. This is probably the worst vendor experience that I think we have had in the 4 or 5 years that I've been serving on this board. The majority of the people in Superior have not seen your weekly digest, but I want to take some time to read a couple of things from it because you are very detailed about it. So,
There's 7 people that have seen it.
there's 7 people that have seen it.
Us.
You're looking at
That's it. So, yeah. So I just want to
It's a
share this.
confidential communication to the board.
Because that's something that I cannot share with...
You're free to discuss anything, but the premise is what I share with you is a confidential communication. So do as you wish. But no, weekly digests are not shared. They're not put on the website. They're not.
Well, I'm glad you wrote it in such great detail. I have to tell you that sometimes the hiring a vendor that has, like you said, the lowest bid, sometimes you get what you pay for. And I think there's a fine line. I'm all for saving the town money, as you know, but at the same time, I think the quality is equally as important. So I'm glad we're going in a different direction. I would hope that Billy Downs Academy is given another opportunity. I know nobody's perfect, but believe me, in all the years that he served the town of Superior, he did not make as many mistakes that have happened in the last 4 months that the Sports Monster vendor has done. So I would hope that if he were to apply or reapply for the tennis, especially for the youth, that he would be given a very fair and open and transparent opportunity to have an opportunity to serve the town of Superior again.
I think we had this discussion back in the spring, but it was Mr. Downs that chose not to respond to the RFP last time.
Okay, I'm just letting you know that I feel very strongly about this, that this is, and I want to say I do appreciate how descriptive you are and how detailed you are about what has taken place. But I don't think I've ever seen anything like it in my life. Yes.
This opens up the bidding process, so anybody can bid on this.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Trustee Scott?
So we don't have a second place from the past bid process? I'm just, you know.
My recollection,
That's
there were multiple.
usually goes to the next
There were
one.
multiple respondents last time.
That's what I usually see.
But we
goes to
weren't
the next
happy with-
lowest bidder.
The other respondents. I'd have to
They
go
weren't-
back to look what.
They weren't next lowest qualified bidder? Is that what you're saying? Okay, thanks.
We felt we'd be better served by going back to the market.
Yeah. I think that's obviously what we have to do.
That can't ever hurt. You can do it fast enough.
I mean, like you said, the summer season is fast approaching, and there are a lot of kids that are eager to play. So just to understand, has this relationship been severed?
Yes. We shared that with you 3 weeks ago, that it had been severed, and last week it was asked, why? This is why.
The reason why I'm asking that is because my son has an appointment tomorrow at 3 o'clock should he not show up, because there's nobody going to be there. That's what I'm saying. It'd be good to have.
I would suggest that they call the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space office to find out what the status of individual lessons are tomorrow. I don't have that information.
But there's a
I
filling
think
person
Sports
or
Master
something.
needs to let us know if they're not going to be there. I mean, I think it's the other way. We shouldn't be chasing to find out is our appointment on. That's not the way business really works. If somebody needs to cancel, they need to call up in plenty of time and tell the parents and the
If
kids
you'd
we're
like
not
me
going to be
to
there.
check on your child's behalf, I'd be glad to.
No,
do
I'm
that.
not asking that. I'm just saying, are they still in existence with us? Yes or no? Are they
No.
No.
Okay, then I guess there's no tennis tomorrow. That's it.
Well, unless Parks and Rec has found a replacement for that lesson or something, who knows, so you might call.
I'm actually transferring a question of an 11-year-old that asked me on the way here. So, do I have practice tomorrow? Yes or no? So I'm not being facetious.
Nobody in the room is able to answer the question. I'd be glad to try to
No
get
one
you an
here.
answer by the people that do have that answer first thing in the morning.
All right, fair enough.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Trustee Pennington?
I attended the CML training with Chris, and likewise, I'm very complimentary on it. Chris, did you already do this? The annual conference is coming up end of June, June 22nd to 25th in Breckenridge. The deadline for early registration is May 21st, and it really is a significant price difference. So I tell you that's Friday, right? $195 for early registrants versus $305 thereafter. So
I'd strongly agree. I think we have $500 in the budget. This would go over that. I bet the manager could find a couple of dollars here and there to have anybody who would want to go to that. I think CML is a great organization and would encourage anybody that has the time to
I'm
go
happy.
and do that. So
I'm happy to pass this around if
Yeah.
anybody wants to look at the
Yeah.
programs. I think
I believe everybody's received. You may
Yeah.
not have
Oh.
received it because I
We
believe
did.
they went out
What are the
in
dates?
January or February.
June 22nd to 25th, $195 fee by May 21st.
I think probably all the elected officials previous to the new board members probably have all this. They mail it to us. So look in your stack if you're interested. But, I would encourage anybody that can to contact the town manager, and we can make that happen. I think, if I remember correctly also, there might be a board member who's running for re-election in CML. I don't know if that's true or not.
On the executive board?
That's just what comes to mind.
Yeah. I've been participating a lot in CML for quite a while as Pan, and I guess, and due to being pretty active and all that, ran for executive committee a couple of years ago, but now my term is up and I need to potentially run again. And in order to do that, I do need an endorsement of my city council in order to do that. It doesn't cost the town anything. I've never requested any fees to be paid or conferences to be paid or anything like that, or time or anything. But it would be great to have the endorsement to run. It's a requirement to be able to do that.
I think, do you need the endorsement verbally, in writing? How do you need it?
I need it verbally, I think, and then and I think
letter.
A letter
I've
the
written a
mayor
letter in the past.
writes a letter.
would be more than glad to endorse
I'll
it for
entertain
that.
a motion that we support trustee Skumatz in her election.
I would definitely second that.
Second. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. So you could forward me the letter to I don't know if you sign it or I sign it or you sign it. Whoever needs to sign it, just have that happen, I guess.
And I would like to thank you too, Lisa, because you're the one who made us aware of this training. Going on, a library board meeting originally scheduled for last week has been rescheduled for June 2nd ahead of their report to their council. So I just wanted to reiterate what I thought I heard at my first meeting, that if possible, we would like to eventually shoot for 2 representatives on that, if they're open to that possibility.
I think that'd be
Okay.
great. Actually,
It's more
when you-
proportional.
Yeah, when you
Right.
go, if I think we're approving people tonight, but assuming that happens, then whoever's going to that meeting, I'd ask for that. I can't see that there's a downside. So.
Right, okay. Assuming these approvals, Historical Commission meets Friday at 10 a.m. I know they're eager to have everybody who has an interest in that there. I would reiterate, first, I want to thank staff for putting those stakes out in Community Park East, marking 30, 50, and 50. And I would encourage the board, if you haven't already, to go out and you get to feel it, and it really adds a nice perspective. So whoever had that idea, I think it's a brilliant idea to actually be able to go out and touch and feel that. Then just a couple of questions. Last time I mentioned Chapter 16. This is the proposed draft of Chapter 16 from way back when. It's a monster. And I would, again, encourage us to sort of suggest, or at least some alternatives be presented to us as to how we want to break that down for our approval, because it was not able to be redlined in the Planning Commission, and I just think it would be very difficult to wade through, of course, with no experience, trying to ascertain the changes.
Justice Gomez.
And I recall that it couldn't be redlined, and my other recollection is I think they moved whole sections from place to place, so it's not even like you can follow pages down.
They deleted 90 pages as well, which is
That's
relevant.
part of the problem, is moving creates an 800-page long red line document when you move large sections to different chapters.
So I guess, is there a proposal for how we might best tackle this, or?
Yes, it's a workshop discussion item for your next meeting, your June 14th meeting, at which time the board, assuming that the Plan Commission is completed, for the board to discuss the process it would like to undertake in undertaking its review. Is it interested in taking its staff recommendation? Is it interested in taking its Planning Commission recommendation? Or does it want to do what the Planning Commission has just concluded, which is a page-by-page review?
Okay. Great. Moving on to your, Scott, you mentioned the e-blast of the
Deadline for
interest,
appointments.
interest and deadline. We have two public hearings coming up. One, as I understand it, tomorrow by the Planning Commission on medical marijuana, one June 14th on the Clearwire issue. Is it possible to, well, I guess I'm going to put forth my opinion. I do believe there are certain things that are important enough to the residents of this community to broadcast to them if we've got that capability. So is it possible as well to use that e-blast capability to announce those public hearings to our residents?
Yes, it is possible. We had that discussion, I believe, 3 weeks ago, at which time, based on the head nods, the majority of the board said they did not want to change the process midstream or try to pick and choose which items. If, and it's part of Chapter 16, if there's a change in the public notification process that the board would like to see memorialized, do it. But the guidance that we had received from the board when this was last discussed within, again, the last 3 weeks was, but we don't want to do it on a case-by-case basis. If the rules are going to change, let's change them uniformly. So if there's going to be a broader notification beyond the 1,000 feet, if there's going to be whatever extraordinary, whatever new or additional measures might be taken, let's do them for all cases.
And I think that, in addition, I don't know if everybody on the board signs up to the, it's not the discussion board, it's the notification thing that the town does.
The e-blast registry includes those that have signed up for the electronic newsletter, and I believe that the information we shared with you, there's about 2,040 addresses, roughly. 2,040, 2,080 email addresses that receive that.
So I'm hoping that everybody that has email access, that we send all these things to. I know that we send people that sign up for them, obviously get the agendas of the Planning Commission, and they get the agendas of the town board, I mean, because that's put out electronically, so.
I guess I'm not suggesting, I unequivocally feel this way, that certain things are so important, in public hearings being one of them, that hiding it or
Burying it.
burying it within an agenda just makes it that more difficult for a resident to become aware, and I'm for ease of residents being aware. So we possibly, the better place might be to put this on that same work session agenda that we're going to do the other matter on, so we can have a fuller discussion of it. But,
I guess at the end of the day, not to interrupt you, but, the planning, when you get the planning commission, this is what's on their agenda, there's like 5 things on it, so it's, unless you're going to do something special about what that would look like, for, say, for, Project X, you're going to do, send out an electronic thing that is, a page
but
worth.
who gets the planning commission
Who
agenda
wants to sign
currently?
up for it?
Just, it comes over the CAC. It does not go out, however, to those 2,000 names.
I get 2 of them. I get one because I subscribe to the bulletin board, and I get one because I subscribe to the electronic newsletter.
Andrew?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Didn't Steve Smith offer up the HOA email list for this specific item? If we put together a flyer or information for the public, he would be willing to send
Right.
it out to his email list.
As well.
Which is, I'm under the impression, considerably larger than ours.
I don't see if they want to.
It could be a substitute, but it could be an addition.
Exactly.
But I would
As a
add-
way of expanding the people that get electronic notification.
I would like to see us address this in a work session, sort of more broadly, and the issue of broader notification versus narrower notification and what meets the standard. And I know, Joe, you raised that issue of when do we, when don't we? So I guess I would like to officially propose that be on a work session.
That's the one place where it's clear.
Right.
And I would be concerned with anything that isn't across the board. I don't just want to handpick, this application might be
Right.
controversial, and therefore we're going to provide more public notice. I think that could get us into legal hot
Right.
water.
And that was the guidance where we were going. Can we write a special newsletter article for this particular item advising this item is going to be an upcoming agenda for both the Plan Commission and the Town Board?
I would recommend against that.
That was the guidance, the discussion, and the board's guidance was, we're not going to do that. But it would be an appropriate discussion for how we're going to communicate land use public hearing applications, which is one paragraph out of the 300-plus pages
Yeah.
of Chapter 16.
Right.
And I don't see any downside, it's something that we should talk about, but everybody who, I'm trying to think, everybody who signs, I'm thinking of the Venn diagram here. So does everybody who get the electronic newsletter is not the same subset of the people that subscribe to the, whatever, once again, the
Bulletin board?
The bulletin board.
The Bulletin Board has a subscription of about 180 email addresses. We proactively solicited emails for the purposes of going to the e-newsletter, and that's where we started with about 1,500, got up to 1,900, and I believe the information I shared with you this week, we were at 2,040 or 2,080.
So I'm just wondering, is there any downside to sending the people that get the newsletter, is there any downside to sending them the agendas of Planning Commission? I don't see, seems like if more people get more information unless.
I believe they get it. Again, as I indicated, I get 2 sets, and I get them.
I get 2 as well.
For that reason, because I've subscribed to both.
Okay.
So, I think.
Go ahead.
Can the discussion be on the agenda, maybe when we do the form or something like that?
I think the discussion.
Right. Right, and just to finish up, is there the possibility of saying, Town of Superior notice, public hearing on Clearwire at X meeting, public hearing on medical marijuana planning commission, 7 p.m., whatever. I'm not asking for an article, I'm simply asking for the statement of what, when, where, going over the newsletter email to these 2,000 residents.
And so you're just saying, can't we not just send out, not necessarily send out the whole public, the
Right.
whole
Again, it's
agenda, but just the part that
buried.
involves people? So
Public
just the
hearing.
every
I'm just
public
saying
hearing
every
would be
public
noticed,
hearing.
would get an email list, that's what you're saying?
Yes, we'll just get the what, when, where, so they're duly notified.
Just trying to be clear.
Okay.
Can we? Yes, if it's the will of the board.
I think that's an excellent idea to announce public hearings at each and every one of them.
Well, we always
do.
We always did it.
That's what it's all about.
But the point is, it's down, as the sixth
I
item
think
on
in
the agenda.
addition.
So
We
that's-
don't have any secret public
It's
hearings.
not the subject line, for instance.
It's the way in which
The
we
subject
do
line
so.
would
I
make it
understood
easier.
what you meant, in this manner.
If the point is to
Right.
communicate.
No, I just meant in addition, it doesn't hurt to run it again in a different format.
So I guess I would ask, is that something we can do as a result of this discussion for those that are coming up soon, or do we need to do it in a formal work session and work it through?
We would need an ordinance or some
Okay.
formal.
I think it's changing Chapter 16.
Exactly, it's
It's
changing
changing the
16.
notification requirements from public hearings.
Which we last did when we went to formal notification within 1,000 feet for every conceptual plan review. There's a formal amendment of Chapter 16.
I am making a distinction between what is absolutely required by the code to have occurred before the code can, something can be amended or whatever, and what procedurally we as a town board choose to do to inform our residents.
I guess,
I'm not
yeah.
lumping them all into the town code.
Choosing to do something that's not procedurally required as a town board is problematic to me. That on something we're required to do, if we choose to do something for some and not all, if we're going to do it for all, then why don't we change it?
We
to make-
absolutely have to meet the town code requirements, no doubt,
Right,
no
but then
debate.
you're choosing to do something more for some.
Right, that's a
That's
problem.
my problem with it, unless we choose to do it for all. I don't have a problem if that's
But
what we do.
everybody will and does have the ability to subscribe to that email list.
No, I'm not talking about all
No,
people,
not
I'm
all
talking about all
recipients.
hearings.
Oh, well, I'm just saying procedurally, we would agree to say all public hearings, so that we're clear on, and staff is clear. But can we agree to put it on a work session? Do we have that at least decided?
I nod my head for that.
Okay, and then the last thing, so we can move on to the rest of the meeting, is I noticed and you mentioned it in your report too, Scott, on the dirt fill. I personally had the unfortunate experience in one community I lived in where I ordered dirt and the dirt was contaminated, and I was just wondering if, when we fill dirt, do we actually have to have that certificate that it's clean, or what's our town policy on that?
I will check with those that made the arrangements to accept the free fill and find out what environmental assurances. I know we did not have the dirt tested before it was dumped, but there were some representations about where it was coming from and its quality.
Okay.
I'll find out what was.
I think just as a matter of course, we might consider having a policy to have those assurances, written assurances as to the quality, because cleaning it up's a whole lot harder than dumping it, is my experience. So, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Randall.
As was already mentioned, we did stake late on Friday the Community Park East, the three areas. I would encourage board members to go over and take a look if they have interest about the setbacks from the creek. As it was represented, there's a 30-foot buffer, a 50-foot from the center of the creek, and a 50-foot buffer from the edge of the creek. There were some communications going on around about yards, but it's feet. There was also reference already to the sales tax reports. Again, the information continues to be extremely encouraging. March receipts were up 10.8%. For the year, we're up 10.6%. So this doesn't appear to be a blip. It really looks to be a continuing trend. Likewise, sales tax from vehicle sales are up significantly. Last month, they were up 26.7%. We had been behind, so that the 26% increase in the month of May only brought us up to being equal to last year. And then I'd also shared information about a very encouraging conversation with the principal from Monarch High School and our intentions to be able to finally implement the Student Government Day next March. I'm expecting to have a very active involvement with town staff in the curriculum to get the students aware of and involved of the roles that they might play, and then ultimately having them shadow all of us, the entire board, most of the senior staff, and we may even want to take this down to even some of the committee and commission chairs, that they could even shadow one, if you will, for a day. And what would it be like to be the open space chairman or the ProStat chairman or the Planning Commission chairman. But it will culminate in a mock board meeting. And when we've talked about getting insight from youth in the community, while it's a small subset, my experience is you'll find out what's on the minds of the kids within the region when they sit down in those chairs and what ideas they might be proposing. So,
Manager, to break in, should be greatly congratulated for doing that. You know, it's beyond your scope of duties, but I think it's something that's really important, engaging civic responsibility and engagement with youth. So I think that's a fabulous thing.
appreciate that. Very briefly on the next agenda, we don't know where we're at on, or won't know where we're at on appointments until the deadline passes and see how many we've got. But as a placeholder, we've put it on there for the next meeting. We do expect to have the second reading of the ordinance amending Chapter 16 regarding the banning of medical marijuana distributors, dispensaries, and other medical marijuana facilities. The Clearwire application is not going to the Planning Commission tomorrow. Their submission last week was incomplete, so it's been deferred. Whether it comes back in June or not, don't know at this point. We will have at the workshop session what we describe as Water Law 101, but we'll have a presentation from Mr. Zylas, our water attorney, and it was at that meeting as well we were anticipating talking about the process that the board would like to undertake as it reviews Chapter 16.
Process, not the...
Process.
I thought it was the whole...
Oh, absolutely not.
It just says Chapter 16.
Well, for the first half for water and then the second half of the work session too.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
You could make your life easy.
Great.
Great job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Check.
That's all I have.
Marbury?
I don't have anything, thanks.
Ms. Harden?
No, I think Mike used this.
I just love that. Thank you.
One more thing.
Yes, Trustee Williams.
I realize that our next board meeting is almost a whole month from now. It's June 14th.
4 weeks.
Yeah. And I will be gone that week. It's the only time I'm gone all summer. So I just want everyone to know that. And I will have a report, and I will, for the Dr. Cog meeting this week, and I will give it to Sandy to read.
Great. Thank you. All right, that brings us to the consent agenda, and on the consent...
Public comment?
About what? Oh, I'm sorry, yes, public comment on consent agenda, non-agenda items. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you.
I knew you would, George,
Yes.
that's why I said something.
Yep, no, thank you, appreciate
Joe
that.
Kepler, 109 South Fourth. I got 2 items. I want to know what prompted this change in our A and B tonight. 1 week for discussion on that is not enough. As you know, on a consent agenda, I'm talking about A, I'm talking about the changes for the code enforcement officer. You know, that does not affect one of you people sitting behind that board. Changing that code enforcement and giving him more authority, it's affecting the original town superior of Sagamore. You have an HOA up there, you come under. 1 week it says there's no cons. I didn't have an opportunity to put a con in there. Last week it come before the board as a first reading. Tonight you got it for the second reading. This is wrong. 1 week, we don't want it to begin with. Why was it initiated? Tell me why this change was initiated. Was it on account of town staff? Was it a recommendation of the board? Or was it a recommendation of the code officer?
I think it was a recommendation from town staff that, it's something that would naturally fall under the code enforcement officer's position.
Is he qualified for being a policeman and ticketing somebody for a license plate that is expired?
I think it follows
I
under...
mean, that comes under a police department as far as I'm concerned, and a sheriff's department.
Town attorney
That's
is
under state statutes as license, not code enforcement.
the town attorney is leaning forward.
The code enforcement officer is authorized to write tickets for up to $499, and that has no possibility of jail time. You're correct. Anything over $499, or if there's a possibility of jail time, only a sworn police officer would be able to write that ticket. But by moving these offenses, as the ordinance says tonight, it will mean the fine is up to $499 with no possibility of jail time.
How come you're doing this? We don't, the people of this town...
I'm sorry,
don't want
George,
it.
you got to be at the
You
mic, sorry.
can hear me.
Well, you got to be at the
I
mic,
talk loud
sorry.
enough that you can hear me.
It's not for us, it's for people that
I
are
don't
watching.
mean on TV either.
Okay.
But I'm serious. We're sitting back here and passing stuff that's affecting people that live in this town, and I'm getting tired of it. I've lived here 70 years, was born here. Let's eliminate some of this stuff, that we need this, we need this, and we need that. Let's talk to some people out here in this town before we pass it. Go talk to them. I have. I'm not too happy with what you're doing. Please,
Okay.
1 week ain't enough.
Trustee Hanson?
Did anybody write tickets like he's talking about before this was changed? Or is this something new? So somebody was able to write tickets before?
Yes.
What
Yeah.
brought this to light was that we had had a complaint on East Yarrow, where about 90% of our code enforcement attentions get focused, not in original town in Sagamore, despite representations to the contrary. It went to court, and it was over an issue of an out-of-state expired license plate. And the defense was, the person that wrote the ticket didn't have the authority to because it's in the wrong chapter, and the case got dismissed. So after it got brought to our attention that there were things that we wanted and had instructed the code enforcement officer to be out pursuing, we went through and looked, what in Chapter 10 do we need to move elsewhere? As we listed as one of the options, an option could have been, let's expand the authority to Chapter 10. There are a number of things in there that we don't want to have the code enforcement officer out doing. But we identified 4 specific that we did, and that's what's in front of you.
Okay. So it sounds like there's not going to be really any, like, the number of tickets written is going to shoot up or anything like that. It's just really...
And
there's
before
no
2007, these kinds of things would have fallen to Boulder County Sheriff.
Yeah, okay.
And as we indicated before, one of the things the Boulder County Sheriff had asked us when we talked about doing this was, please take some of this very, very low-hanging fruit off of our plate so that we can devote the time and attention to the things that we all feel are more appropriate for police officers to be responding to.
Okay.
Not barking dogs, not RVs, not whatever. The kinds of things that they were responding to before.
Okay.
Well, I'll just tell you, we weren't left alone, please. We like to live a happy life here. We don't need codes and codes and codes and codes. If we got a problem, we can call the town hall and it can be taken care of. We don't need the expanded code enforcement deal. Enough, 2 days of it's enough now. It upsets people. They know when he's coming around on Mondays and Tuesdays. We didn't want one to begin with. It's a waste of money as far as I'm concerned. We got along just fine before these recommendations.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. The other thing I have, this is for you, Mayor.
Okay.
We had a historical well house destroyed on the Jake Toucher property, or the Ambrose property, or Matson property that we just purchased. I recommended, when I was on the board, a cleanup, but I did not recommend tearing down a well house that's been there since 1900. This well house served the industrial mine up there during the summer months when the creek run, and he come before the historical commission, and they rejected, and you probably were on the liaison between, they rejected him tearing that well house down. It was designated historical. Oh yes, it was. He tore the garage down. They would not allow him to tear the well house down when he was trying to get annexed to the town so he could build back there. Well, we got it tore down without no authority of tearing it down. Town staff recommended it come out. Coal Cow tore it down. Now, what are we going to do about these type of things? I know we have a new liaison between the Historical Society now and the town board, but we had one before. Why was this tore down when it's a historical building? Give me a reason.
Well, I have no idea. It wasn't specifically targeted for tearing it down. It was the recommendation of the board to spend open space money to clear up the property.
We didn't need to tear it down and clear the property up when it's historical, Mayor.
Yep.
I mean, the right hand don't know what the left hand's doing here. Let's face it. And I'm getting damn tired of it.
Okay.
I think it's up to you to do something about it.
Okay.
Either replace it back or whatever you want to do, but historical is historical, and that's what we got a commission for. If we don't need a commission, then let's dissolve the commission. That's all I got to say. If we got to make decisions from the town staff.
Okay.
And I'm not for it.
Okay. Additional public comment on consent agenda or non-agenda items? Okay. Seeing none, on the consent agenda is the final approval of an ordinance amending Chapters 8 and 10 of the Superior Municipal Code, final approval of an ordinance amending Chapters 10 and 11 of the Superior Municipal Code, and preliminary approval of an ordinance amending Chapter 16 of the Superior Municipal Code regarding uses related to medical marijuana. Motion by Trustee Skumatz. Is there a second? Trustee Sorelli, discussion.
I just have one quick thing.
Trustee Williams?
It says, it shall be affirmative defense to a violation of this section that the person was under the age of 16 and operating a refreshment stand. Does that mean kids can't have a refreshment stand on a corner?
Where are you at?
That's,
Where, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah, I don't know
Can you
where
tell
you're
us
at
where you are?
It's going from one of the chapters to
Yeah, it's on,
It says
well,
I
for
read
me,
the-
it's on,
it says
Section
affirmative
11.
defense.
it's the defense of.
They're allowed to have
They're
it.
It's
allowed
not
to.
an offense.
oh, okay.
So it means that you can have a lemonade stand.
That's,
Thank you.
And it's being deleted and moved. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Additional question, Trustee Pennington?
So, from the attorney, could you address what Mr. Kupner said about 8 and 10? Is there any fundamental, are we simply moving from one chapter to another so they're in the appropriate chapter? Are we, by approving these, changing in substance anything?
The only thing we're changing by moving the chapters is the penalty. And the penalty changes what the code enforcement, it's impossible for me to talk into the mic and see you at the same time, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It changes what the code enforcement officer is authorized to enforce. Because the code enforcement officer is not a sworn police officer, he cannot enforce any violation of the code that involves jail time or a fine of over $499. By moving these things into the two chapters, we are enabling the code enforcement officer to enforce them. So we are changing the penalties to lessen them on those offenses. The available penalties. The penalty is always up to the judge. It's the available penalty that's important.
So we're actually lessening the
Yes.
available penalty that's currently within the law, but in different chapters.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, let's see, we're not spending any money. All in favor? Unanimous, thank you very much. That brings us to item number 8, appointments of board members to external committees. Mr. Randall, you can start us out.
We broke it up into external appointments and internal appointments. And you had an addendum that went out on Friday as a result of some request for clarification regarding some groups that only the mayor is entitled to serve on. But the addendum went out with both the addition of both the Metro Mayor's Caucus and the Mayor's Commissioners Coalition. But the other ones involved the interchange committee that was created through the intergovernmental agreement with our neighbors to the north, representatives to the Louisville Library Board of Trustees, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, Rocky Flat Stewardship Council, and the Boulder County Consortium of Cities. And I believe there were multiple communications through back channels, but staff had received 2 different directions from the board, one in late April and then again middle of last week. So hopefully this reflects the most recent will of the board on how they want to spend their additional time.
So I did my utmost in trying to be, everybody have kind of equal share, equal number. I hope that I've come to some reasonable accommodation for the board. The addition I don't have in front of me, but that's for Metro mayors, and correct, Trustees Gregoris and Skumatz, correct me if I'm wrong. So not that I'm anticipating missing any of these meetings since I don't, but Metro mayors would be Trustee Skumatz, is that right? Do I understand this? Yes. And then US 36 mayors and commissioners would be Trustee Gregoris as the alternate. Is that how I understand this? Okay.
just to clarify, on Metro Mayors, so anybody can be an alternate to that on this board?
Nobody, so going to the, I suppose anybody could be. I have never in the life of Metro Mayors seen anybody go there as an alternate.
Okay.
Trustee Williams.
So, with my research on the Metro Mayors Caucus and the 36 Mayors Commissioner Coalition, I was told that only mayors and only mayor pro tems can actually participate in the meetings, and that outside of that, they could sit at the public meeting, but they can't participate. They have to sit off to the side.
I have no idea. Once again, I've never seen anybody go to Metro Mayors that's not a mayor, ever. And US 36 mayors and commissioners, that's clearly not true because staff participates in that, staff from the town, staff from Boulder County and the city of Boulder.
And they clarified that as elected officials, that it's only, both of these are for only mayors and mayor pro tems.
I don't think actually US 36 even has any, this is a voluntary organization, I don't think that has any standing rules.
Well, I did call both of them, and they mentioned that, especially the Metro Mayors Caucus, that you can't participate unless you're a mayor, an elected mayor, or an elected mayor pro tem at the meetings.
So, US 36, once again, I think that I don't think that there are any rules associated with it. It's a kind of a voluntary organization that people come to that talk about 36 issues. I don't think that there's any rule about who can participate. Metro Mayors, honestly, I don't know what the rules are, but once again, I've never seen anybody, one, I never miss the meetings, and two, I don't think I've ever seen anybody there who's not a mayor.
Does our attorney have any input, or do you have no idea?
I would have to look at the Metro Mayors if they have bylaws or, I don't know.
I mean, it's not one of those things, it's not an organization where people vote at. So
They don't have really regulatory control
Right.
or jurisdiction to do a lot.
So things are basically done as consensus. So what has Metro Mayors done in the past? So we've talked about water conservation, and there's a conservation compact that we've talked about. There's energy conservation that we've talked about, but none of these are sort of like, what do you think about this? Who's doing what? And once again, there's not really business that's occurring at any of these. So that's my perspective. Once again, makes no difference to me whatsoever where people want to participate, and that's really at the direction of the board. This is my recommendation. If people aren't happy with it, then that's fine too. Trustee Hanson.
I appreciate that we're actually going to settle this tonight and have at least some alternate on both of those. If we find in the future that it is only supposed to be mayors or mayor pro tems, then I would recommend we change it then. But if between the two of you, you guys are fine with what was suggested, then let's move forward and do it. But again, I would say if we find something different in the future, then we make the change to be right.
After speaking to their reps at the Metro Mayors Caucus and the Mayors Commissioners Coalition, these expressly said that only mayors can attend these, and a mayor pro tem can or cannot be appointed.
Well, once again, I have no idea what Metro Mayor says. I can tell you for sure 100% that they're US 36. That's not the case. Since we don't operate that. It's not a way that this operates. So, and it's not a them. There's no staff person. So.
Well, I did speak to two staff members, one at each one, and that is their recommendation. That is.
Well, our staff member is Jay, so.
If we could get it in writing, I would be, fine with that.
Sure.
I'm just thinking in the sense of continuity in the
That's-
past, that's what has been done.
Do you know who you spoke with at Metro Mayors?
I'd have to, I do.
Catherine Marinelli is she works for Civic Engagement, is not.
Right.
So she is the staff person, with Peter Kenny, but so.
I do know who I spoke to, but I left that at home, unfortunately.
I'm happy to look at their bylaws if, that becomes an issue.
Yep, sounds good. Trustee Gagos?
So I feel like Trustee Skumas and I have reached an agreement, and we're both comfortable with it. If that's really the case, then if that's the law, if there is such a law, then I guess the mayor pro tem should serve as the Metro mayors and we can switch. But until that happens, I'm comfortable staying with 36. You're comfortable staying with Metro.
It seems like it makes sense, and honestly, from a logical perspective, for people that are on the interchange committee, I mean, that's basically US 36 type of issue. So it seems like a logical nexus there. So, but I agree. I mean, if there is a bylaw for Metro mayors that exists, then we should make that correction.
We can revisit it, like
Yeah.
Chris said, like you said, but until that happens, I'm okay with the way we are. So.
Seems like it makes sense from my perspective.
Well, we can also consider that there isn't an alternate, especially if we are not sure about this Metro Mayor's Caucus, although
That's fine, too.
the woman I spoke to was,
That's fine. Once again, I'm happy to, I go to all these meetings. I don't think I've missed one. And if, it's important, then great. If we can't have alternates, then fine, too. I really
We don't want that because we do want to be represented. So in case you get
Correct.
sick or something, we want to have somebody to back you up. So
Right.
not having an alternate to me is not an alternative to what we're proposing.
So- Yep.
so is
We need
there
to
a
have
way
somebody to
that,
back the mayor up.
is there a way that we can get confirmation on these two?
I mean,
Not tonight.
not tonight, but can
So the suggestion is we'll research whether or not there's bylaws for these. I guess the recommendation, which I agree with, is approve this as it is, and if that's not accurate, then we can make those changes.
I'll second that.
Oh, is that a motion? I guess that was a motion. So as stands on the most recently reflected memo or cover page. That sound fair?
And I don't have, I guess, did we get this electronically
Yes.
that it came?
Came on
that's
Friday
why.
afternoon as a
Okay.
result of the requested addition of the
Okay.
mayoral.
Okay. I guess that's a motion in a second. You have that recorded? I guess the mayor made the motion and trustee Skumatz made the second.
Then maybe we should amend this and put the alternates on here so we know who's alternate for which one.
Because it's not in writing here, so I guess,
For the Metro mayors? Is that what-
and for the
For the other
36
one.
too.
Correct.
Yeah.
Either alternates on
Stated
this.
what they were
So-
at the beginning of the meeting.
Motion and a second with the clarification as outlined by trustee Gagos.
Okay.
So, same again, trustee
Metro mayors,
Skumas.
US 36 mayors and commissioners for trustee Gagos.
And we can alter that and put that in writing?
Yeah, that'd be recorded as part of them.
All right.
Yeah.
Part of the record, right? The minutes?
And then when would we be able to find out the bylaws on both of them?
Probably within an hour of the question being asked during normal business hours.
Okey-doke.
Okay, so manager or somebody from the manager's staff, maybe you could shoot us an email.
Typically respond to these kinds of questions as follow-ups in your weekly digest.
That would be fine too. Whatever works. So, any further discussion regarding this?
Bring it up.
All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 9, appointment of board members to internal committees. And once again, I try to do my best in gauging people's interest in putting them with the organizations that they either have history or have interest in. And once again, that was my goal here. So I don't know if there's any concerns regarding the internal appointments.
Well, it looks good.
Okay, so I'll move that the appointments are as outlined in the memo,
I'll
seconded by
second.
Trustee Gagos. Discussion. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to item number 10, was executive session to consider personnel matters pursuant to CRS 24-6-402, print 4, print F on the top of the manager's evaluation. Is there a motion? By trustee Skumatz, is there a second? Trustee Hansen, further discussion? All in favor? All in favor?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Unanimous.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. We're in
I'm
executive
already
session.
off to the next
Yeah, I
thing.
was also up to the, yeah.